Get out of my restaurant. Emily Carter's voice didn't shake. Her hand pressed flat against her swollen belly. 7 months of life, 7 months of grief, and she stared at Richard Blackwell like she had nothing left to lose. Because she didn't. Her husband was dead. Her savings were gone. And the most powerful man in Cedar Ridge, Tennessee was standing in her workplace telling her she had 48 hours before he made sure she lost everything. Nobody moved to help her. Nobody said a word until the door swung open. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel, hit the bell, so you never miss a story like this, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. She had been awake since 4 in the morning. Not because the baby wouldn't let her sleep, though that was part of it. Not because the radiator in her apartment had started making that grinding noise again, the one the landlord had been promising to fix for 3 months. It was because Emily Carter had a habit she couldn't break. Every morning before the sun came up over the ridgeline, she would sit at the edge of her bed, press Ryan's dog tags against the center of her chest and breathe. Just breathe. It was the only quiet she allowed herself. By 4:30, she was dressed. By 5, she was behind the wheel of a car that needed new tires, driving through the bomber-wrapped Tennessee mountain roads toward the Morning Glory Diner, where she had worked double shifts 6 days a week for the past 4 months. She didn't complain about it. That wasn't Emily's way. Ryan used to say that about her. He used to say, "Em, you've got more grit in your little finger than most people carry in their whole body." He said it like it was the most admirable thing in the world, like her stubbornness was a gift. She was starting to wonder if it was just a curse wearing a pretty dress. The Morning Glory was a roadside diner that sat at the edge of Route 11, the kind of place that had been there so long it had become part of the landscape. Truckers stopped there, tourists stopped there when their GPS took them the scenic route through Cedar Ridge. The booths were red vinyl that had seen better decades. The coffee was strong enough to wake the dead, which was the only reason Emily drank 3 cups every morning shift. She unlocked the back door and stepped into the kitchen before the prep cook arrived. She liked it that way. She liked the silence of an empty diner. She liked the way the first morning light came through the streaked windows and hit the counter in long yellow bars. For a few minutes before the rush, before the noise, before people needed things from her, she could just be a woman standing in a kitchen, waiting for the world to start again. She tied her apron around her belly as best she could. 7 months. The baby was moving more now. In the mornings, especially when she drank her first cup of coffee, she could feel him shifting around like he was trying to find the most comfortable position in a world that hadn't quite made room for him yet. "I know, buddy," she said softly, pressing her hand to her side where a foot had just connected with her ribs. "I know. It's early. I'm sorry." She talked to him constantly. She'd started doing it sometime in month 4 when the silence in the apartment had become unbearable, and she realized that he was the only other person who was always there, always with her, the only piece of Ryan that was still breathing. She'd decided, without quite deciding it, that the baby's name would be James Ryan Carter. James after Ryan's father. Ryan, because she refused to let anyone forget. By 7:15, the diner was filling up with the breakfast crowd. Emily moved between tables with the efficiency of someone who had done this so long, her body ran on muscle memory. Coffee refills, plate deliveries, check calculations done in her head because the card reader on table 7 had been broken for 2 weeks and nobody had fixed it. She smiled when people smiled at her. She laughed at the jokes the regulars made. She answered the question, "How are you doing, honey?" with the same steady, better everyday thank you that she had perfected over the past year. Because in Cedar Ridge, people asked that question and meant it kindly, but they didn't really want the real answer. The real answer was that she was exhausted in a way that sleep didn't fix. The real answer was that she had $342 in her checking account after paying her last electric bill. The real answer was that she had a letter from her landlord sitting on her kitchen table, forwarded from Richard Blackwell's property management company, informing her that her lease renewal had been declined pending further review, which was a very clean and professional way of saying that somebody wanted her out. She hadn't told anyone about that letter. She hadn't even let herself fully think about it yet. Every time her brain started to go there, she pulled it back. One shift at a time, one table at a time, one breath at a time. That was how you survived things you weren't supposed to be able to survive. saw. It was just before noon when the motorcycles pulled in. Emily heard them before she saw them, the low rumble of 6 engines coming down Route 11, the sound rolling through the diner windows like distant thunder. Half the customers looked up from their food. Old Harold Simmons, who sat at the counter every day from 11 to 1 and ordered the same turkey club every single time, swiveled on his stool to look out the window. Bikers, he said like it explained something. Emily glanced up through the glass. 6 motorcycles, big ones. The riders wore leather cuts vests with patches she could see even from across the parking lot. She didn't need to read the patches to know who they were. The red and white colors, the winged skull on the back. Hell's Angels. She watched them park in a row the synchronized way they did it, unhurried and deliberate. Helmets came off. She could see them now, 6 men ranging in age from maybe 35 to 60, weathered the way outdoor men get weathered. Not threatening exactly, just present. The kind of men who occupied space with intention. Half her customers were watching them. "I'll get their table," Emily said. Donna, the other waitress on shift, made a sound that wasn't quite an objection. "You sure I don't mind?" "I've got it," Emily said. She didn't know why she said it. Maybe because she was tired of watching people prejudge things from a distance. Maybe because she'd had enough of fear for one lifetime, and she refused to add any more to her collection. She picked up a menu stack and pushed out through the swinging door. They were already seated by the time she got there, crammed into the 2 big corner booths she'd pushed together for large parties. They'd arranged themselves without being asked, the bigger men on the outside edges, the quieter ones in the middle. One of them was studying the laminated menu with the intense focus of a man who hadn't eaten since morning. Another was pouring creamer into a coffee cup he'd apparently just helped himself to from the station near the window. "I was going to bring that," Emily said. The man with the creamer looked up. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, dark-haired, with a jaw that looked like it had been broken at least once and healed slightly off-center. There was something in his eyes, not aggression, but assessment, the way soldiers look at a room. She'd seen that look on Ryan's face enough times to recognize it. "Sorry," he said and meant it. Force of habit. "We've been on the road since 6. I'll pay for the pot if that's the issue." "It's not the issue," Emily said. She set the menus down. "You're fine. What can I get you all started with?" "Coffee," said 3 of them simultaneously. The man with the broken set jaw, he had Marcus stitched in white above the left breast pocket of his cut, said, "I'll take water too if you don't mind. And I'm sorry about the coffee, seriously." "You apologized already," Emily said. "Once was enough." He looked at her for a second. Then he nodded slow. "Fair enough." She took their orders without ceremony. They were, she noted, remarkably normal in their requests. 2 of them wanted the breakfast platter even though it was past 11. One wanted a burger. Marcus ordered a BLT and a side of coleslaw and asked if the bread was toasted by default or if he had to request it. She told him it was toasted by default. He said good he preferred toasted. They were polite, not performatively polite, not the kind of polite that's really just nervousness wearing a smile. Genuinely, quietly courteous. They said please. They said thank you when she brought the coffee. When she set down the heavy platter for the man in the corner, biggest one of the group called Dex by the others, he moved his elbow off the table to make room for her arm. Small things. But Emily Carter had learned to measure people by small things. Ryan had taught her that too. He said the big moments in a person's character were easy to perform for an audience. It was the small, unobserved moments that told the truth. She was halfway back to the counter when Marcus called after her. "Excuse me, ma'am." She turned. He was looking at her necklace, specifically at the tag hanging from it, Ryan's military ID tag, worn smooth from the number of times her fingers had found it over the past year. His expression had changed. Something in it had gone still in a way that wasn't comfortable to look at. "That dog tag," he said carefully, "is that—" He stopped, started again. "What branch?" Emily's hand went to the tag automatically. "Marines," she said. "My husband." Marcus was very quiet for a moment. "What unit?" she told him. The change in his face was immediate and unmistakable. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't gasp, didn't stand up, didn't do any of the things that would have drawn attention. But the color shifted in his skin. Something behind his eyes moved in a way that looked like pain and recognition crashing into each other at high speed. "What was his name?" Marcus asked. His voice was different now. Quieter, almost careful like he was handling something breakable. Carter, Emily said. Ryan Carter. Sergeant Ryan Carter. Marcus Reed sat back in his booth like the air had gone out of him. The lunch rush hit before she could ask him why. 3 more tables filled up simultaneously. Donna called out that the coffee urn on the far end had run dry, and someone at table 4 wanted to know if the soup was gluten-free, which it was not, and needed explaining in a way that took longer than it should have. Emily worked. That was what she did. She kept her hands busy and her mind in the present, and she served people their food and refilled their drinks and didn't let herself think about the way Marcus Reed had looked when she'd said her husband's name. She didn't let herself think about it until she was bringing the check to the corner booth an hour later and found that all 6 men were still there, not lingering over coffee and talking, actually waiting. Marcus was watching the door, and when she came out of the kitchen, his eyes went straight to her. "Can we talk?" he said. "When you have a minute." "I have a minute now," Emily said, which wasn't true, but she said it anyway. He looked at his brothers, and she understood instinctively that that was what they were to each other. Brothers, even if none of them shared blood, and they all quietly found reasons to look away. At the window, at their phones, at the remains of their lunch. Marcus folded his hands on the table. He had working hands, scarred at the knuckles. "I knew your husband," he said. Emily's breath stopped. Not paused, stopped, full stop, like someone had hit the pause button on her lungs. "You knew Ryan," she said. It wasn't really a question. It came out more like something she was saying to make it real. "I served near him. Different unit, but the region overlapped in ways it shouldn't have officially." He paused. "There was a situation. November about 4 years ago. We had a man down in a position it wasn't a position you went into not without." He stopped himself, looked at the table, collected himself in the way of a man who had told difficult stories before and knew where the emotional tripwires were. "Ryan came in anyway," Marcus said quietly. "He didn't have to. It wasn't his squad, wasn't his order. He came in because there was a man down and he was the closest, and that was enough reason for him." Emily's hand found the dog tag. "He pulled my man out," Marcus said. "Took fire doing it. Got clipped in the shoulder. He brushed it off like it was nothing. He wouldn't let us thank him. Said he was just doing what anyone would do." He paused. "But that's not true. Not everyone would do that." "No," Emily agreed. Her voice was very steady. She was very far down inside herself, managing the steadiness from somewhere deep. "No, they wouldn't. I've thought about him a lot," Marcus said. "Over the years. Thought about him every time I looked at the guys who are still here because of what he did that day. We never had a way to reach out. We tried after we heard, tried to find a way to contact his family, but He shook his head. "We found a wall every time." Emily nodded slowly. She knew about the wall. She'd hit her own. "I want you to know," Marcus said, and now he looked directly at her. The full weight of whatever he was carrying in those eyes pointed at her without apology. "That your husband was one of the best men I have ever encountered in my life. And I have encountered a lot of men in a lot of circumstances that show you exactly who a person is." Emily's eyes were burning. She would not cry in the diner. She had a policy about that. Unbreakable. She had broken it exactly once in the first week, and she decided never again. Because once you cry in front of a full restaurant in a small town, people start looking at you differently, and she couldn't afford to be looked at differently. She needed to be the capable one, the one who was managing, the one who was fine. "Thank you," she said, and then because it was insufficient, "Thank you for telling me that. I'm sorry we couldn't do it sooner," Marcus said. "I'm sorry for a lot of things, but mostly I'm sorry he's not here." She pressed her lips together, pressed the dog tag harder into her palm. "So am I," she said, "every single day." And bam. There was a commotion at the front of the diner, the kind that starts quiet and gets loud fast, a raised voice, the sound of a chair scraping, the way the whole room shifts its attention at once toward a single point. Emily turned. Richard Blackwell was standing near the hostess station. Richard Blackwell did not typically walk into the morning glory. He had places he preferred, newer places, cleaner places, places with wine lists and tablecloths and parking valets. The morning glory was not that, but here he was in his suit that probably cost more than Emily made in a month, and he was talking to Linda, the hostess, and he was not being kind about whatever he was saying. He was 48 years old, Richard Blackwell, silver at his temples, broad in the shoulders, the physical confidence of a man who had never seriously been told no by anyone who had the power to enforce it. He owned 2 commercial buildings on Main Street. He controlled 3 of the sitting town council members. Everyone knew it, and nobody said it out loud. He had run the Cedar Ridge Development Group for 15 years, which was a dignified name for what was in practice a machine for consolidating as much of the town's economic life under Richard Blackwell's control as possible. He'd started turning his attention to Emily's situation 2 months ago. She wasn't sure exactly when or why she'd become a target. Part of it, she suspected, was Ryan's life insurance, which hadn't fully processed yet because of some administrative tangle with the deployment records, a tangle that somehow kept getting more complicated every time she tried to resolve it. Part of it might have been her apartment building, one of the 3 properties on Cedar Ridge Road that Blackwell's company had been quietly acquiring. Part of it might have just been that she was alone and appeared manageable, and Richard Blackwell was the kind of man who looked at manageable people the way a hawk looks at something small moving in an open field. He saw her now. His expression didn't change, Richard. Blackwell had very good control of his expression, but something shifted in his posture. A slight squaring of the shoulders, an almost imperceptible lift of the chin. He walked toward her. Emily did not step back. She was aware without turning around that Marcus was watching from the corner booth. She was aware that 6 men in Hell's Angels cuts had gone very still in a way that was not the stillness of inattention. "Emily," Richard said, "warm, smooth, practiced. I didn't realize you were working today. I should have called ahead." "We're open every day," Emily said. "What can I do for you, Mr. Blackwell?" He looked down at her stomach. Not in the way people usually looked, the soft, involuntary pull of attention toward a pregnant belly. He looked at it the way an appraiser looks at a property he's considering buying, calculating. "I actually came to discuss your lease," he said. "This isn't the place for that conversation," Emily said. "I think it might need to be," Richard said, pleasant and immovable. "The fact is, Emily, the property review has moved forward, and we're looking at some significant renovations coming up. I wanted to let you know personally, rather than through correspondence, that we really can't guarantee the timeline on your renewal." He said it the way a person says something when they know they have all the time in the world and the other person has none. "I'm working," Emily said. "Of course you are. I'll just take 2 minutes." He glanced around the diner, seemed to register the audience for the first time. "Or we can step outside." "We're not stepping outside," Emily said. "Whatever you need to tell me, you can say it right here. I don't have anything to hide, and I doubt you do either." Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Not quite annoyance, not quite respect. Something in between. "The building is going to be unavailable for residential tenancy after the first of the year," he said, dropping the warmth from his voice by exactly 2 degrees. "I wanted to give you maximum notice because of a glance at her belly, your situation. That's 60 days, more than the legal requirement." "The legal requirement," Emily repeated. "That's right. You're telling a woman who is 7 months pregnant that she has 60 days to find new housing. I'm giving you the maximum notice the law requires," he said. "I want to be fair." The diner had gone very quiet. Emily could feel the room listening. She could feel Linda frozen near the hostess stand. She could feel Donna behind the counter coffee pot, still in her hand, watching. She could feel 6 men at the corner booth, very still, very present. "I'll review my lease agreement," Emily said. Her voice did not shake. "And I'll be in touch with my own correspondence." Richard Blackwell studied her for a moment. "I'm just trying to help you plan," he said. "No need to make this adversarial. You walked into my workplace to inform me in front of a full lunch crowd that you're removing my housing while I'm 7 months pregnant with a military widow's benefits case still pending in federal administration," Emily said, clear and flat. "The adversarial one in this conversation isn't me." The silence in the diner was total. Richard Blackwell looked at her. Then slowly his gaze moved to the corner booth, to the 6 men watching him, to Marcus Reed, who had not moved, had not made a sound, but was looking at Richard Blackwell with an expression that was very quiet and very specific and communicated something that no one in that room was willing to misinterpret. Richard adjusted his cufflink. 60 days, Emily, he said. "I'll have the formal notice sent." He walked out. The door swung shut behind him. The whole diner let out a breath. Emily stood in the middle of the floor for a moment. Her heart was hammering. She could feel it in her throat, in her temples, in the soles of her feet. Her hands were perfectly steady because she had decided they would be, and her will on that subject was stronger than her hand's inclination to betray her. She turned toward table 6, a young couple who'd come in for pie and gotten considerably more than they'd bargained for, and said, "Can I get you anything else?" The woman shook her head mutely. Emily nodded and turned back toward the counter. Marcus was standing up, not aggressively. He hadn't moved toward the door. He'd just risen from the booth slowly and was watching her with that same look, the assessment, the recognition, but also something else now. Something that looked a lot like anger held very tightly in check. "Does that happen often?" he asked. "Often enough," Emily said. "Who is he?" "Richard Blackwell. He owns property and all over Cedar Ridge. He's been putting pressure on—" She stopped herself. She didn't know this man. She knew he'd served with Ryan. She knew he'd said things that had cracked something open in her chest that she couldn't quite close, but that didn't mean she knew him. "It's a complicated situation," she finished. Marcus looked at the door where Richard had exited. "It didn't look complicated," he said. "It looked like a bully picking a target." "Those aren't mutually exclusive," Emily said. He looked at her, and then unexpectedly he almost smiled. Not quite, it was the shadow of a smile, the suggestion of one, but it was there. "Fair point," he said. "Duh." They left her a tip that made her hands go still when she counted it out. Not a tip that was trying to make her feel like charity. A tip that said, "We see you and we've been there," the kind of amount that represented something rather than nothing. She stared at it for a long moment. Donna came up beside her and looked over her shoulder. "Huh," Donna said. "Yeah," Emily said. She looked out the window. The 6 motorcycles were still in the parking lot. She could see Marcus out there standing with his back to the diner phone to his ear, talking to someone. She couldn't see his face. She didn't know why she stood there watching for as long as she did. She told herself it was because she needed a moment before the afternoon rush. She told herself it was because the encounter with Richard Blackwell had rattled her more than she wanted to admit, and she needed to let the adrenaline work its way out. But if she was being honest with herself, in the quiet, honest place she only went to in the dark of her apartment at 4 in the morning, she was watching because, for the first time in a very long time, something had happened in her day that felt less like losing ground and more like something else. She didn't have a word for it yet. She pressed Ryan's tag against her sternum through the fabric of her apron. "I don't know what you sent me today," she said very quietly to a man who couldn't hear her. "But it doesn't feel like nothing." She was closing out her tables at 2:30 when Marcus came back through the door. Alone this time. He came to the counter and sat down on a stool and waited until she came around, and then he set his hands flat on the counter and said without preamble, "We're staying in Cedar Ridge tonight." Emily looked at him. "Okay." "I made a call," he said, "to some people who deal with veteran benefit cases. People who actually know how to navigate the administrative part of what you're dealing with. I'd like to give you a name." Emily was quiet for a moment. "I didn't ask you to do that," she said. "No," Marcus agreed, "you didn't." "Why did you—" He thought about the question. He seemed to be the kind of man who didn't answer quickly, who took the question seriously enough to consider it before speaking. "Because Ryan Carter saved my man's life," he said finally. "And probably saved mine too, in ways I'm still accounting for. And right now, the woman carrying his child is being pushed out of her home by a man in a nice suit while nobody in this town says a goddamn word about it. So I made a call." He paused. "I'm going to give you the name whether you want it or not. What you do with it is your business." He slid a folded piece of paper across the counter. Emily looked at it, looked at him. "You know," she said, "Ryan would have liked you." Something moved across Marcus Reed's face. He looked down at the counter for a moment, then back up at her. "I hope so," he said. "I really do." Sam. She worked her double shift. She worked it all the way through the dinner rush, through the slow taper at 8 o'clock, through the last table of high school kids who stayed until they were gently informed that the kitchen was closed. She swept her section. She counted her drawer. She changed out of her apron and put on the jacket that barely zipped over her belly anymore and pushed out the back door into the cool September night. The parking lot behind the diner was dark except for the light above the door. She stood there for a moment breathing. Her feet hurt. Her back had been aching since noon. She was 32 weeks pregnant and she had worked 12 hours, and tomorrow she would do it again, because there was no one else to do it instead. She reached into her jacket pocket and felt the folded paper Marcus had given her. She unfolded it under the parking lot light. A name, a phone number, and 3 words written underneath in handwriting that was precise and deliberate, the writing of a man who took care with his words. We don't forget. Emily Carter stood in the dark parking lot of the Morning Glory Diner. 7 months pregnant, exhausted in every way a person can be exhausted. And she held a piece of paper with 3 words on it. She didn't cry. She breathed. She put the paper back in her pocket where it sat next to her heart for the whole drive home. And she thought about Ryan, who had pulled a stranger out of danger because it was the right thing to do. And she thought about what it meant that the world was still sending her reminders of who he was. And she thought about what happened next, because something was going to happen next. She could feel it the way you can feel a change in weather, not a threat, not exactly, but a gathering, a shift in pressure, the sense that whatever had been building was getting close to the point where it could no longer be contained by the ordinary architecture of a normal life. She drove home through the mountain dark. The baby turned in her belly, slow and deliberate, like he was getting comfortable, like he was settling in for whatever was coming. The name on the paper was Daniel Holt. Emily called him the next morning at 7:15, sitting at her kitchen table in the gray pre-dawn light, still in the oversized Marine Corps sweatshirt she slept in Ryan's, worn thin at the elbows from the number of times she'd reached across a table or a counter or a night where sleep wouldn't come. She had the paper Marcus gave her flat on the table in front of her, and she had her phone in her hand, and she sat there for a full 3 minutes before she dialed. She had made calls like this before. She knew how they went. There would be a hold, then an automated menu, then a person who was kind but overwhelmed, then a referral to a different department, then a form, then a waiting period. She'd run that circuit 4 times in the past year, each time believing she was getting somewhere, and each time arriving at the same polite, immovable wall. She dialed anyway. It rang twice. A man picked up on the second ring. Not an automated system. A man alert like he'd been awake for a while already. Holt speaking. Emily blinked. Yes, my name is Emily Carter. I was given your number by a man named Marcus Reed. He said you handle veteran benefit cases. A pause, then. Marcus called me last night. I've been expecting to hear from you. Another pause, shorter. Mrs. Carter, I'm going to need about an hour of your time and access to whatever documentation you have. Can you do that this morning? Emily looked at the clock on her microwave. She had to be at the diner by 9. I can do that right now, she said. For the next 55 minutes, Daniel Holt walked her through her case with the precision of a man who did this for a living and had the specific kind of anger that comes from watching bureaucracy fail people who have already sacrificed everything. He asked questions she didn't know she needed to answer. He identified 3 separate points in her benefit application where paperwork had been either lost, misfiled, or, and here his voice took on a particular flatness, redirected, which was a word he used carefully and which Emily understood to mean something more deliberate than accident. Who would redirect it, she asked. That's what I'm going to find out, Daniel said. Mrs. Carter, I want to be honest with you. Your case should have been resolved 8 months ago. The delays you're experiencing are not standard. They are not procedural. Something is actively working against your application moving forward. The kitchen felt very still. Define actively, Emily said. I mean, someone with access to the processing system has flagged your file in a way that puts it perpetually at the bottom of the queue. It's not illegal on its face. It's bureaucratic manipulation, which is harder to prove and easier to sustain. He paused. Do you have any idea who would want to delay your benefits? Emily thought about Richard Blackwell standing in the Morning Glory with his adjusted cufflinks and his 60-day notice and his smile that never reached his eyes. I might, she said. Then I need you to write everything down, Daniel said. Every interaction, every date, every name, every conversation you can remember. Start from when the delays began. Can you do that? Yes. Good. I'll be in touch by end of week. And Mrs. Carter? He stopped. Yes. Marcus Reed is a good man, Daniel said. He doesn't make calls like this for just anyone. After she hung up, Emily sat at the table for a moment. The baby moved, a slow rolling motion, unhurried and certain. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, we're doing something. She got up, put on her shoes, and went to work. The Hells Angels were still in Cedar Ridge. She saw their bikes outside the Cedar Ridge Motor Inn. when she drove past on Route 11. 6 motorcycles in a row, same as the day before. She didn't know what she felt about that. The word that came to mind was steadying, which surprised her because these were men she'd met less than 24 hours ago, and she wasn't the kind of person who steadied easily off a stranger's presence. But these weren't quite strangers anymore. That was the strange part. Marcus had known Ryan. He had been there in that country in that chaos, and Ryan had run toward the sound of trouble because that was who Ryan was, and Marcus had watched it happen and carried it with him for years. There was a kind of intimacy in that knowledge that bypassed the ordinary mechanics of how people got to know each other. They weren't starting from zero. They were starting from Ryan, which meant they were starting from somewhere that already mattered. She pulled into the diner lot and sat in her car for a moment. Through the windshield, she could see Donna unlocking the front door and Harold Simmons already standing on the step waiting even though they didn't open for another 10 minutes. Harold had nowhere else to be. He'd been coming to the Morning Glory every weekday for 11 years since his wife passed, and Emily suspected the rhythm of it, the drive over the counter, stool, the turkey club, was the architecture that kept his days from dissolving into each other. She understood that now in a way she hadn't before Ryan died. The architecture of ordinary things, how important it was, how fragile. She got out of the car and went in through the back. Marcus came in at 10:30 with 2 of the others. The big one called Dex, and a quieter man with silver streaks in his beard, who everyone seemed to call Bishop, though whether that was his name or his road name, she hadn't asked. They sat at the counter this time, which felt different from the corner booths. The counter was where regulars sat. The counter meant you were comfortable enough not to need a wall at your back. Emily brought them coffee without being asked. "You called Holt," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "First thing this morning," she said. He nodded. "He's good. He's the best I know for this kind of situation. He got 3 guys from our chapter through benefit appeals that had been sitting dead for 2 years each. He said someone is actively manipulating my file," Emily said, keeping her voice level. Marcus's jaw tightened, barely perceptible, but there. "He say who?" "He said he'd find out. I have my own guesses." "Blackwell," Marcus said. Emily paused. She hadn't named him. Marcus had arrived at it on his own, and that told her something about how yesterday's encounter had read to someone looking at it fresh. "I don't have proof," she said. "What do you have, Tkon?" She thought about it. "He owns my building. He started the lease pressure 2 months after I applied for benefits reinstatement. His property management company is the one that sent the notice. And every time I've tried to get traction on the benefit case through the county liaison's office, I end up talking to someone who defers to someone else, who defers back to the original person who told me to wait." She paused. "And the county liaison's office is on the 2nd floor of a building Richard Blackwell owns." Dex, who had been silent until this point, set down his coffee cup. "That's not a coincidence," he said. His voice was lower than expected, measured. "That's architecture." Emily looked at him. "Exactly." Marcus was watching her steadily. "How long have you been managing this alone?" "Since the beginning," she said. "Why didn't you—" He stopped himself. "Why didn't I ask for help?" She kept her voice even. "Who was I going to ask? The people at church who bring casseroles and then go back to their lives, the veteran services coordinator who keeps sending me forms that disappear into a void, my mother-in-law who is dealing with her own grief and barely has the bandwidth to hold herself together." She shook her head. "There's a whole system of people who want to help until it gets complicated. When it gets complicated, you're alone. I've been alone for 11 months. I know how to do it." The counter was quiet. Then Dex said quietly, "You shouldn't have to." Something moved through Emily's chest. She pressed it down. "No," she agreed. "I shouldn't. But that's a different conversation." At noon, Marcus asked if they could use one of the diner's back tables during the slow period to make some calls. Emily said yes without asking why, because she'd developed an instinct about these men in the past 24 hours that told her the why would be something she'd want to know later, and something they'd tell her when it was ready. She brought them coffee and stayed on her side of the counter. An hour later, Marcus waved her over. She came to the back table. 3 of them were there now. Marcus, Dex, and Bishop, and there was a laptop open, a notepad covered in handwriting, and 3 cell phones in various states of active use. "Sit down," Marcus said. She sat. "We've been making calls this morning," Marcus said. "People we know. Veterans Networks Legal contacts a woman named Sandra Pruitt, who runs a housing advocacy org out of Knoxville that specifically handles retaliation cases. He looked at her. What Blackwell is doing to your housing situation, the way he's timed it, the way he's delivered it, there's a pattern here that Sandra has seen before. It's a pressure campaign. He's trying to create instability and then offer himself as the solution. Emily frowned. What does that mean? It means he wants something from you, Dex said. You figure out what he wants, you figure out the whole picture. He's been making noise about the life insurance payout, Emily said slowly. It was the first time she'd said this out loud, and it felt strange to hear it leave her mouth. Ryan had a policy outside the military benefit, a private policy. It's substantial. It's tied up in the same administrative knot as the benefits, but it's there. She paused. I found out last month that the policy has a property lien provision. If I were to become insolvent or homeless, there's a legal mechanism by which certain outstanding debts could be attached to the payout before I receive it. The three men looked at each other. He's trying to make you insolvent, Marcus said. That's what I think, Emily said, but I can't prove it, and saying it out loud to anyone in Cedar Ridge has not been productive. Because everyone in Cedar Ridge is either connected to him or afraid of him, Bishop said. It was the first time he'd spoken directly to her, and his voice surprised her quieter than his size suggested considered. Or both, Emily said. Marcus leaned back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way people do when they're running calculations they don't want to say out loud yet. Then he looked at her. We're going to stay a few more days, he said, if that's all right with you. Emily's first instinct was to say, you don't have to do that. To say I've been managing and I'll keep managing and I don't need. It sat on the tip of her tongue, practiced and ready. She didn't say it. She looked at Marcus Reed, who had known her husband, who had carried the weight of an unpaid debt for years, who had walked into her diner by chance, and was now sitting in the back booth with a notepad and a purpose. You can stay as long as you need to, she said. What she didn't know was that while she was working the afternoon rush, Marcus had made one more call. Not to a lawyer or a housing advocate, to a man named Cooper, who ran a chapter in Knoxville and who had a history with Richard Blackwell's business practices that went back 5 years to a land deal that had gone wrong and left 3 families without homes and left Cooper with a grudge the size of the Tennessee Valley. Cooper told Marcus things. Marcus wrote them down. By 4 o'clock, Marcus had 4 pages of notes and an expression that Emily, when she brought him a coffee refill, read immediately as the expression of a man who has discovered that the problem is worse than he thought and is deciding how to feel about that. What? She said. How much do you know about Blackwell's history in this county? Marcus asked. Some, Emily said. He's been buying property aggressively for the past decade. There were 2 rezoning controversies. One went his way, one didn't. He sued the contractor who didn't go his way. The contractor went bankrupt. People noticed, but nobody did anything. There were 3 families displaced from a housing development in 2021, Marcus said. Development that never got built. The land sat empty for 2 years and then got quietly absorbed into a commercial parcel. The families got legal minimum notice and no assistance. Emily stared at him. Were any of them military? One of them, Marcus said, a Army, disabled veteran, single father. What happened to them? Marcus's jaw worked. Cooper lost track, which means they went somewhere they didn't have help going. The afternoon light was coming through the diner windows at the low slanted angle it got in September when the sun started giving up earlier. Emily looked at it for a moment. He does this, she said, not a question. A statement of a thing she had suspected but not been able to name. This is what he does. He finds people who are already holding too much, and he adds weight until something breaks. And then he catches whatever falls, Marcus said. And nobody stops him because nobody can see the whole picture, Emily said. Each piece looks like business, legal business. Unfortunate, but legal. Until you put the pieces together, Marcus said, which is what we're doing. The way he said we, she noticed it. She let it land. Why? She asked, not accusatory, genuinely asking. You've been here one day. You don't owe me anything. Marcus looked at her with that steady, particular look. No, he said, but I owed your husband something, and he's not here to collect it, so I'm going to collect it the only way I can. He paused, which means making sure that what he left behind is protected. Emily looked down at the table, at her hands, at the tag hanging from her neck. He would have argued with you, she said quietly. He would have said he didn't do it for repayment. I know, Marcus said. That's why I'm not asking his permission. Yeah. The next morning, Richard Blackwell sent a formal notice. It arrived by email to the address on file with his property management company, an email Emily had set up specifically for correspondence related to the apartment because she'd learned early on to keep her records clean and separate. She read it standing in her kitchen before her coffee had finished brewing, and she read it twice. It wasn't just the 60-day notice formalized. There was a new element, an outstanding balance claim. Blackwell's company was alleging that Emily owed $460 in unpaid property maintenance fees from the previous lease period fees that were, as far as she could recall, not outlined in any lease agreement she had signed, and fees she had never been invoiced for during the period in question. If the balance wasn't resolved within 30 days, they reserved the right to refer it to collections. A debt in collections, even a disputed one, would affect her credit. Affected credit would make it nearly impossible to secure a new lease anywhere else in Cedar Ridge, and it would potentially trigger the very lien mechanism attached to Ryan's insurance payout that she'd been terrified of since she'd discovered it existed. It was elegant in its way. She hated that she could see the elegance in it. She called Marcus. He picked up on the first ring. He sent a fake invoice, she said without preamble. A pause, then, how much? $460? Maintenance fees that weren't in my lease. Do you have your lease? Every page, scanned and backed up in 3 places. Another pause. She could hear movement on his end, the sound of him already in motion. Forward the email to me and forward me the lease document. He paused. Sandra Pruitt can have a legal response drafted by end of day. Disputing a fraudulent debt claim within 30 days of receipt stops the clock on the collections threat. I know, Emily said. I looked it up 20 minutes ago. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Of course you did. I've been managing this alone for 11 months, she said. I had to learn. Yeah, he said, and there was something in the word not pity which she would have resented, but something more like grief on her behalf. Something that said you should not have had to learn this. Forward me everything. She did. By 2 o'clock, Sandra Pruitt's office had drafted and sent a formal dispute letter. By 4, they'd filed a complaint with the Tennessee Real Estate Commission, citing the undisclosed fee as a potential violation of the state's landlord-tenant disclosure requirements. By 5, Emily got a call from a number she didn't recognize. Mrs. Carter. A woman's voice. Careful. My name is Ellen Marsh. I used to work for Blackwell Property Group. I saw some activity on my former employer's filing system today. I still have access because they didn't revoke it when I left, which tells you how organized they are, and I need to talk to you. Emily sat down. I'm listening, she said. Ellen Marsh had worked for Richard Blackwell for 6 years. She'd left 8 months ago, which she told Emily in the first 30 seconds of their conversation, and the reason she'd left was something she'd been carrying like a stone in her chest ever since. She'd seen things, not illegal things. She was quick to say she was very particular about that, careful in the way of someone who'd spent time thinking about exactly how to characterize what she'd witnessed, but things that were wrong, systematically, deliberately wrong. He has a file, Ellen said. He keeps files on tenants he calls them pressure candidates, people who are in vulnerable positions, but who have assets he can reach eventually. He tracks their financial situations. He times his pressure campaigns to coincide with moments when they're most destabilized. Emily's hand tightened on the phone. Did he have a file on me? She asked. A pause. Yes, Ellen said. I saw it. I saw your name in the system 6 months ago. There were notes about the insurance case, about the benefit application, she stopped, about your pregnancy, about your due date, about the timeline for when the payout would clear. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. He was tracking my due date, Emily said. He tracks everything, Ellen said. He's been planning this for months. The maintenance fee claim, that's something he does. He creates a paper trail of alleged debt that looks legitimate from the outside, and then he uses it as leverage. Most people settle because they can't afford to fight it. Settling is an admission of the debt, which then becomes a real collection item. I'm not settling, Emily said. I know, Ellen said. That's why I'm calling, because I know what you're dealing with, and I know what's coming next. She paused. He's going to escalate. When the dispute letter landed, he has a next step. He always has a next step. What is it? Ellen hesitated. He's going to go public. He's going to reach out to someone at the local paper. He has a contact there, and he's going to plant a story, something sympathetic to him, something that reframes the situation. Local developer navigating difficult tenant relationships kind of coverage. It sounds innocuous, but it establishes his narrative before you can establish yours. Emily thought about Cedar Ridge, about the way the town worked, about the people who read the weekly paper because it was the weekly paper and had always been the weekly paper, and it was how they understood their community. When? Emily asked. Soon, Ellen said. Within the next few days. Would you be willing to talk to someone? Emily said. A legal contact I've been working with. Someone who's building a documentation file. Another pause. Longer this time. I have a job now, Ellen said. I have a daughter. I have to think about what this could cost me. I understand that, Emily said. She meant it. I'm not asking you to do anything you can't do. I'm asking if you're willing to talk to someone who can tell you what your options are. The silence stretched. Yes, Ellen said finally. Yes, I'll talk to them. After Emily hung up, she sat at her kitchen table for a long time. The apartment around her was the same apartment it had been that morning. Same walls, same furniture, same Ryan-shaped absence in every room. But something had shifted in the past 48 hours that she was only beginning to understand. She was no longer alone in the room, not just because Marcus and his brothers were in Cedar Ridge, but because people were beginning to connect. Ellen Marsh in her new job with her daughter and her stone-in-the-chest guilt. Daniel Holt with his case file and his specific anger at bureaucratic manipulation. Sandra Pruitt in Knoxville, who had seen this pattern before and knew what it looked like from every angle. Richard Blackwell had spent months isolating Emily Carter. What he hadn't anticipated was that the isolation was about to invert. Claire, she told Marcus about Ellen Marsh that evening. He came by the apartment she'd offered because it seemed strange to keep having the important conversations at the diner counter in whispers between table refills. He came alone. He brought 2 cups of coffee from the gas station down the road, which made her laugh for the first time in what felt like a very long time. Gas station coffee, she said, seriously. It's what was open, Marcus said. He was unapologetic about it. They sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd called Daniel Holt that morning, which now felt like a week ago. Marcus listened to her account of the Ellen Marsh conversation without interrupting, which was a quality she'd noted in him. He listened like the information mattered, not like he was waiting for his turn to speak. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. She's scared, he said. Yes. She'll talk, he said. People like that, they've been sitting with it too long, the weight of it. You gave her a door out, and she's going to take it. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. The media angle is the part I'm most concerned about. Because it establishes his narrative first, Emily said. Because in a small town, first narrative wins, Marcus said. Cedar Ridge, how does this town work? Who decides what the story is? Emily thought about it. There are maybe 15 to 20 people who have real influence over public opinion here. The paper contact is probably Tom Garrity. He's the managing editor. He went to school with Blackwell. They golf together. The county commissioner, Dan Reeves, is in Blackwell's pocket. The Chamber of Commerce board is half his people. She paused. But the other half isn't. And there are people in this town who have been waiting for a reason to say something. I've felt it. They look at me and they don't look away the way people look away from problems they've decided not to see. They look at me and then they look somewhere else fast, like they're ashamed. Shame means they know it's wrong, Marcus said. That's different from not caring. Shame without action is useless, Emily said. Shame plus a visible example of someone willing to stand up that's different. He looked at her. You've been standing up quietly, alone, in your apartment and in your files and in phone calls nobody knows about. That's strength, but it's invisible strength. Emily looked at him. Are you suggesting I become visible? She said. I'm suggesting you already are, Marcus said. What I'm suggesting is that visibility needs support around it, or it just becomes a target. He paused. You've got people now, Emily. That's different than yesterday. She registered her name in his mouth. He'd used it without thinking naturally, and neither of them made anything of it. He's going to go after you too, she said. Once he knows you're helping me, he doesn't like opposition. I know, Marcus said. He seemed entirely untroubled by this. He has connections, she said. He'll dig up whatever he can find on you and the others. He'll use it. Then we better move faster than he can dig, Marcus said. He said it calmly, not arrogantly, just with the matter-of-fact confidence of a man who had operated in situations where the window was small and the stakes were absolute, and who had learned to function well under exactly those conditions. Emily looked at him across the gas station coffee and her kitchen table. She thought about Ryan, who had the same quality. That stillness under pressure, that economy of energy, the ability to be fully present in a moment without being consumed by it. She understood with a sudden clarity that came from somewhere beyond rational thought that Ryan Carter had saved Marcus Reed's life, and that Marcus Reed was sitting in her kitchen, and that whatever happened next was happening because of who Ryan was. Not what he'd done in the abstract, who he was specifically, the particular shape of his character, the instinct that had taken him into danger for a stranger had created this chain of consequence that had led to this table, this night, this conversation. Ryan was gone. But he was here too, in every person he'd touched, in every life he'd bent towards something better just by being himself. Emily pressed her hand flat against her belly. The baby moved under her palm, slow and definite. "Okay," she said. Her voice was steady. It was always steady, but this time it meant something different. This time it wasn't the steadiness of a woman holding herself together. "Tell me what we do next." Marcus Reed looked at her across the table. For just a moment, something in his face that had been tightly held released like a man who has been carrying a debt for a very long time and has just finally been given a way to begin repaying it. "We build the picture," he said, "so all of it, every piece, and then we make sure everyone who needs to see it can see it." "And then," Emily asked, "and then," Marcus said, "we let the truth do what it does." He said it simply, without drama. Like a man who had learned the hard way in the kind of circumstances that teach things permanently, that the truth, when it finally gets room to move, tends to move very fast. Outside, the Tennessee night was deep and quiet. The ridgeline was invisible against the dark sky. The town below was settling into sleep, ordinary and unaware. In 48 hours, that would change. Richard Blackwell didn't know it yet, but the picture was building. And Emily Carter was no longer building it alone. The story ran on Wednesday morning. Emily knew it was coming. Ellen had warned her. Marcus had warned her, and somewhere in the part of herself that had been tracking Richard Blackwell's patterns for months, she had felt it approaching the way you feel bad weather before it arrives. But knowing something is coming and experiencing it when it lands are two entirely different things. And when she pulled up the Cedar Ridge Courier's website at 6:47 in the morning and saw the headline, her stomach dropped in a way that had nothing to do with the baby. Local developer faces harassment campaign from tenant advocacy groups. She read it once, then again, then a third time slowly, the way you read something when you're hoping the words will rearrange themselves into something less damaging if you give them enough chances. They didn't. The article was 400 words of careful surgical character work. Richard Blackwell was quoted extensively. He was thoughtful, he was measured. He expressed genuine concern for the housing crisis in Cedar Ridge, while also noting that certain outside organizations had begun pressuring his company with what he characterized as bad faith legal filings. He mentioned, without naming her, a tenant who had fallen behind on property maintenance obligations and who had brought in outside counsel to avoid resolving the matter through normal channels. He did not mention that the tenant was a pregnant military widow. He did not mention that the maintenance fees had never appeared in any lease agreement she had signed. He did not mention Ryan Carter. Tom Garrity, the managing editor who had gone to school with Blackwell and golfed with him on Sundays, had run it without a single quote from the other side. Emily called Marcus before she'd fully processed what she was feeling. He picked up on the first ring, which told her he had already seen it. "I know," he said before she spoke. "He didn't mention Ryan," she said. Her voice was flat. "He made it about a tenant dispute. He erased everything, the military connection, the benefits case, the fake invoice. She stopped, pressed her lips together. "He made it sound like I'm the problem." "I know," Marcus said again. Steady, like a wall that wasn't going to move. "People in this town read that paper," she said. "They trust it. They've been reading it for 40 years. Tom Garrity's father ran it before Tom did, and his father's father before that. When people in Cedar Ridge want to know what's true, they open the Courier." "Then we change what they read," Marcus said. "How?" Emily said. We can't force Tom Garrity to run a correction. We can't. Emily, his voice cut through, not hard but direct. I need you to listen to me for a minute. Can you do that? She breathed. Yes. Garrity controls the paper. He does not control the story. The story is bigger than his paper, and we're going to make sure it gets somewhere that doesn't need his permission. He paused. Daniel Holt has a contact at the Knoxville Sentinel, a real journalist, investigative desk. She's been looking at Blackwell's county development records for an unrelated piece, and when Daniel told her about your situation last night, she wanted to talk to you. Emily was very still. Last night, she said, you already knew this was coming. Ellen told us yesterday afternoon that the piece was running today, Marcus said. We've been working since then. She sat with Enid for a moment. The fact that while she had slept fitfully, turning the baby restless, these men had been working, building something in the dark so that when morning came and the ground shifted, there was already something underneath her. Her name is Claire Weston, Marcus said. She'll call you this morning. Talk to her. What do I tell her? Everything, Marcus said. The whole picture. From the beginning. Claire Weston called at 8:15. She was efficient and warm in the way of someone who had learned to put sources at ease quickly because the stories she covered didn't leave room for long runway. She asked smart questions and she listened to the answers without filling the silence, which was the mark of someone who understood that silence was where the real information lived. Emily told her everything: Ryan's death, the benefits application, the administrative delays, the lease notice, the fake invoice, the pressure campaign timeline, Ellen Marsh, the file Richard Blackwell kept on what he called pressure candidates. She laid it out sequentially, clearly, with dates and documentation she recited from memory because she had been living inside these facts for so long, they had become part of her internal architecture. Claire Weston did not gasp. She did not editorialize. She asked 3 clarifying questions, confirmed the spelling of 4 names, and said, Mrs. Carter, are you willing to go on record? Yes, Emily said without hesitation. A brief pause. I want you to understand what that means. Your name will be in the story. Your situation will be public. Blackwell's legal team will respond. I understand, Emily said. Mr. Blackwell made my situation public this morning without my name attached. I'd rather it be public with my name attached. At least then people know who's actually talking. Another pause, and Emily could hear something shift in Claire's tone, not unprofessional, but warmer, more direct. I want to be clear with you, Claire said. I can't promise you a specific outcome from this story. I can promise you that if what you're telling me checks out with the documentation, and I believe it will, the Sentinel will run this prominently. Blackwell has been on our radar for other reasons, and this connects to a larger pattern we've been developing. What pattern? Emily asked. I'm not in a position to share that yet, Claire said, but when my piece runs, you're going to understand why yours isn't an isolated case. She paused. Mrs. Carter, Emily, how are you holding up genuinely? The question surprised her, not because it was inappropriate, because it was real, an actual question, asking for an actual answer from someone who was going to put her name in a newspaper and wanted to make sure she understood what she was getting into. I'm holding up the way you hold up when you don't have an alternative, Emily said. But I've got people now that I didn't have a week ago. That's different. The Hells Angels, Claire said. Daniel Holt mentioned that. Marcus Reed, Emily said. He served near my husband. She searched for the right word. He showed up. That's the only way I know how to describe it. He showed up. Can I talk to him? I'll ask him, Emily said. Marcus agreed to talk to Claire, which didn't surprise Emily. What surprised her was what he said after the call and when he came by the diner at noon and sat at his usual counter stool and wrapped both hands around a coffee mug. She's going to want to talk to the others too, he said. Dex, Bishop, probably Jerry and Cole. Is that a problem? He considered it. No, but I want them to know what they're agreeing to. Not everyone in our world wants press attention. Some of these guys have lives and histories that aren't. He chose his words carefully. The Hells Angels name carries weight. It carries it in different directions depending on who's reading it. I know, Emily said. Most people see the patch and they make up their minds before anything else happens, Marcus said. Doesn't matter what we actually do. Doesn't matter that 4 of us are veterans. Doesn't matter that Dex runs a free auto repair program for veterans families out of his shop in Chattanooga. Doesn't matter that Bishop taught high school for 12 years before he retired. He said this without bitterness, just fact. People are going to read about Hell's Angels protecting a widow, and some of them are going to focus on the wrong part of that sentence. Emily looked at him. Then let's make sure the right part of the sentence is loud enough to drown out the wrong part, she said. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he almost smiled again, that shadow of a thing barely there. Ryan really would have liked you, he said. He had good taste, Emily said. The call from Cedar Ridge City Hall came at 2:17 in the afternoon, while Emily was clearing table 3. It was a woman named Patricia Avery who worked in the county commissioner's office and who identified herself with the practiced neutrality of someone delivering a message she hadn't written and wasn't entirely comfortable with. Mrs. Carter, Commissioner Reeves wanted to make you aware that there's been a review initiated into your current lease status with Blackwell Property Group. Emily set down her stack of plates at the counter. Donna took them automatically. What kind of review? Emily asked. A standard review, Patricia said in the tone of someone reading from a script. The commissioner's office has been made aware of the situation and wants to ensure all parties are treated fairly under applicable housing regulations. Commissioner Reeves is going to ensure that Richard Blackwell treats me fairly, Emily said. Is that what you're telling me? A pause. Patricia Avery's scripted neutrality wavered very slightly. The commissioner wanted to ensure you were aware of the review. Tell Commissioner Reeves I'm aware, Emily said, and tell him I have legal counsel, a housing advocate in Knoxville, and a journalist at the Sentinel who is very interested in the relationship between the commissioner's office and Blackwell Property Group's development permits over the past 10 years. She paused. Make sure you get all of that. Silence. I'll convey your response, Patricia Avery said and hung up. Emily stood at the counter for a moment. Her heart was going fast, not from fear, from something that felt unexpectedly like momentum, like the sensation of an object that has been pushed downhill and has just realized it is moving faster than the things in its way. Donna appeared at her elbow. Everything okay? Donna asked. Getting there, Emily said. That evening, something happened that none of them had engineered. Harold Simmons, old Harold, who came in every weekday from 11 to 1 and ordered the same turkey club, was waiting for Emily when she came out the back door after her shift. He was standing under the parking lot light, his hat in his hands, the way men of his generation stood when they were about to say something that mattered. Harold, Emily said, surprised, what are you doing out here? It's cold. I read the paper this morning, Harold said. That piece about you. Harold, I know you didn't do what he implied, Harold said, and his voice was steady in the way of a man who had been practicing what he wanted to say. I've been coming into that diner for 11 years. I know who you are. I knew who your husband was. I didn't know him personally, but Cedar Ridge is small enough that a Marine who gets killed overseas is not a stranger. People knew. Emily was quiet. I should have said something sooner, Harold said. When Blackwell started in on you, I knew what was happening, not the specifics, but I knew the shape of it. I've watched him do this before, and I said nothing because I'm an old man, and I told myself it wasn't my business and that you'd manage somehow. He shook his head. That was wrong. I know it was wrong, and I know saying so now doesn't fix it. Harold, Emily said gently, it's okay. It isn't actually, he said, but I want to make it better if I can. I was on the Cedar Ridge Zoning Board for 12 years, 1998 through 2010. I was there for the first 2 of Blackwell's permit hearings. He paused. And I have minutes. Personal records I kept because I didn't trust the official ones. I have testimony transcripts and I have notes from executive sessions that weren't officially recorded. Another pause. If someone needed that documentation, I have it. Emily stared at him. You've had that this whole time, she said softly, not accusatory, almost awed. I wasn't sure it was relevant until today, Harold said. Until that article made it clear that someone was telling the story wrong and somebody needed to tell it right. She reached out and put her hand on his arm. Can I introduce you to some people, she said. Harold put his hat back on. That's why I'm standing out here in the cold, he said. Marcus was still awake when Emily texted him. She sent 3 words. Come to the diner. He arrived in 12 minutes with Dex, which suggested they hadn't been far. Harold Simmons shook both their hands with the formality of a man from a generation where handshakes carried legal weight, and then he sat down at the counter and opened a battered manila folder he'd been carrying under his arm. The next hour was one of the most significant hours Emily Carter had experienced in 12 months of very significant hours. Harold walked them through 12 years of zoning board records with the methodical precision of a man who had spent his professional life in municipal governance and understood exactly which details mattered. He knew which permits had been expedited and which had been delayed and why. He knew which votes had been unanimous and which had required what he called significant persuasion behind closed doors. He knew about a specific executive session in 2003 where Richard Blackwell had presented a development proposal that had been rejected by a 4-3 vote, and what had happened to 2 of the 4 who'd voted against him in the subsequent 12 months. Dex was taking notes. Marcus was listening in that absolute way he had. "One of the 4 who voted no," Harold said at one point and stopped. He looked at his hands for a moment. "That was me." The table went very still. "What happened?" Marcus asked. "My son had a business loan come up for renewal," Harold said. "Community bank small operation. The loan officer called him and told him there had been a review of his account and they were going to have to call the note." He paused. The bank's largest investor at the time was a real estate holding company. The holding company was a subsidiary of a Blackwell development group. The silence in the diner was total. "Your son lost his business," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "He managed to refinance," Harold said, "but he knew, I knew, and we both knew that saying anything about it would make it worse." He looked up. "I have been carrying that for 20 years. I have been watching that man operate in this county for 20 years, and I said nothing because I was afraid, and because I told myself that someday it would catch up to him on its own." His voice had gone rough at the edges. "And then a girl who is 7 months pregnant and wearing her dead husband's dog tags around her neck starts working double shifts in my diner, and I sit there every day eating my turkey club and I think." He stopped. "I think, when does it catch up to him?" Harold said. "When does somebody finally make it catch up?" Marcus Reed looked at the old man across the diner counter. "Tonight," he said quietly. "It starts tonight." Daniel Holt called at 9:47. Emily was sitting in the corner booth with Harold and Marcus when her phone rang, and she answered it on speaker because they were past the point of privacy in this particular conversation. "I need everyone to listen," Daniel said without preamble. "I've been working the benefit case all day, and I found something that changes the picture significantly." The table went quiet. "Emily, you told me early on that your benefit application kept hitting a wall at the county liaison's office, the one in the Blackwell building." "That's right," Emily said. "I've been requesting records all day through a federal access process that bypasses county channels. I got a partial response an hour ago." He paused, and in the pause, Emily could hear him pulling himself together the way people do when they've been staring at something for so long it's taken on a physical weight. "There is a processing hold on your file. It was placed manually 8 months ago, not by a federal employee, by a county-level administrative contact who had access to the processing system through a shared government services portal." "Who?" Marcus said. "The contact is registered to an account belonging to the Cedar Ridge County Development Coordination Office," Daniel said, "which for the past 6 years has been staffed primarily by 2 people, one of whom is Richard Blackwell's sister-in-law." The booth went very, very quiet. Emily heard Harold Simmons make a sound under his breath that was not quite a word. "He put a hold on my benefits," Emily said. Her voice was completely level, completely controlled, like a surface of water just before something hits it. "He accessed a federal benefit system through a county backdoor and put a manual hold on my case." "It appears that way," Daniel said. "I want to be clear. This is preliminary. I need the full records to confirm it. But Emily, if this holds up, this isn't a lease dispute anymore. This is potential federal interference with a military survivor's benefit case." The weight of the word federal sat in the middle of the table. "That's criminal," Marcus said. "Potentially," Daniel said. "Yes." Emily pressed both hands flat on the table in front of her. She could feel the cool laminate surface under her palms, and she focused on the sensation because the alternative was to let go of the control she'd been maintaining for a very long time, and this was not the moment for that. "What do we do?" she asked. "I make a call in the morning," Daniel said. To the VA's Office of Inspector General. This is exactly what they exist for. But Emily, when I make that call, this moves into federal territory. It's going to move fast and it's going to be visible. I need to know you're prepared for that. I've been prepared for that since I filed the first appeal, Emily said. Make the call. What nobody knew, what Emily didn't know, what Marcus didn't know, was that Ellen Marsh had not slept since talking to Emily 2 days ago. Ellen had spent those 2 days in a private war with herself that looked nothing from the outside. She went to work. She picked up her daughter from school. She made dinner. She helped with homework. She did all the ordinary things that constitute a life, and underneath all of it, she was doing a different calculation, one that had kept her awake at 3 and 4 in the morning, running the numbers on what she was willing to risk and what she could not afford to lose. She had a document. She had never told Emily about the document. She had mentioned the files on her phone, but she had not mentioned that before she left Blackwell's company in the last week she worked there, she had copied something. Not stolen. She had been careful about that distinction, precise about it, because Ellen Marsh was a precise person. She had copied documentation that she had legitimate access to in the course of her employment duties. Documentation that had been created under her direct responsibility. Documentation that was in a strict technical sense, as much her professional record as the company's administrative record. It was a spreadsheet, 43 rows, names, addresses, property parcel numbers, case types, notes. A management document that tracked what Richard Blackwell called internally his portfolio development cases. 43 people. Emily Carter's name was on row 31. Ellen had kept the document for 8 months. She had told herself she was keeping it for protection. She had told herself she was keeping it until she knew what to do with it. She had told herself a lot of things in 8 months that were all true and also all ways of not doing the things she knew she should do. At 11:15 on Wednesday night, she stopped not doing it. She forwarded the spreadsheet to Daniel Holt's email address, which Emily had given her. Then she forwarded it to Claire Weston at the Sentinel. Then she sat at her kitchen table with her hands around a cup of tea that had gone cold and thought about her daughter sleeping down the hall and whether she was doing something that would protect her or expose her. She decided both, and that both was worth it. Her phone rang 4 minutes later. It was Daniel Holt, and when she answered, he said in a voice that was very controlled and very specific, "Ellen, I need you to not contact anyone else tonight. What you just sent me is significant. I need to verify it, and I need to ensure it's handled correctly." "I know," Ellen said. "Are you safe?" Daniel asked. The question surprised her. "Yes, I'm at home." "Good, keep it that way tonight." He paused. "Ellen, what you just did, I want you to understand this changes things considerably." "I know," she said again. "I've known what it would do for 8 months. I just had to decide it was worth it." "Is it?" he asked. She looked down the hall toward her daughter's room. "Yes," she said. "It's worth it." Thursday morning came hard and fast. Emily woke at 4 as always, and for the first time in many mornings, she did not sit at the edge of the bed and breathe through the weight of the day ahead. She got up with something different in her body, not energy exactly, not confidence exactly, but the specific alertness of a person who knows that today is a different kind of day. She was right. By 7, Daniel Holt had confirmed the spreadsheet's authenticity against 3 independent documentation sources. By 7:30, he had called the VA's Office of Inspector General and given them a file summary. By 8, Claire Weston at the Sentinel had run Ellen's document through her editor and gotten the green light to incorporate it into her piece, which was now significantly larger than originally planned. By 8:15, Marcus showed up at Emily's apartment door with coffee, real coffee, this time from the bakery 2 blocks over, and a look on his face that was difficult to read until she realized what it was. Relief, the particular relief of a man who has been worried for several days that the thing he was trying to build was moving too slowly against what was moving against it and has just found out it isn't. "Daniel called me," Marcus said. "We're ahead of him. Ahead of Blackwell. He doesn't know what we have yet. He thinks he landed the newspaper piece, and now he waits for you to get tired or get scared." Marcus set the coffee on her table. "He doesn't know about Ellen's document. He doesn't know about Harold's zoning records. He doesn't know about Claire Weston or the OIG call." He paused. "He's been winning so long, he forgot how to watch his back." "Don't underestimate him," Emily said immediately. "He's smart. He's going to figure out something is happening, and when he does, he's going to move fast. We're moving faster, Marcus said. But you're right, we need today to count. What happens today? Claire's piece runs Friday morning, Marcus said. The Sentinel reaches 300,000 readers. It goes online Thursday night. That's, he calculated, about 36 hours from now. He paused. Between now and then, Blackwell is going to find out what's happening. Someone in his network is going to hear something, maybe from the OIG call, maybe from the county channels when Daniel starts pulling records, maybe from somewhere we haven't anticipated. And when he finds out, he's going to make a move. What kind of move? Emily asked. Marcus looked at her steadily. The kind that makes this morning feel like the quiet part, he said. He was right. The call came at 10:47. Not to Emily. To the Morning Glory diner on the landline behind the counter, which Linda answered and which caused Linda's face to go through 3 distinct expressions in rapid succession before she came to find Emily in the dining room. It's for you, Linda said. He says his name is Blackwell. The whole diner seemed to pause. Emily looked at Linda, then she walked to the counter and picked up the phone. This is Emily Carter, she said. Emily. Richard Blackwell's voice was smooth and unhurried, but underneath it, running just beneath the surface the way a current runs beneath still water, was something new. Something that was almost but not quite alarm. I think we should talk. We're talking, Emily said. In person, he said. Today. I'd like to propose a resolution to this situation that works for everyone. The diner was quiet enough that she could hear the refrigerator hum. A resolution, Emily said. This has gotten more complicated than it needed to be. Richard said, I think if we sit down, just the two of us, we can find a way forward that makes sense for your situation. Your housing, your benefits case, I have relationships with people who can move things quickly when there's a will to do so. He was offering her something. She recognized it immediately for what it was, not a resolution. A silencing. Come talk to me alone, away from the lawyers and the journalists and the veterans with their documentation folders, and I will make things easier for you, and in exchange, you will stop doing what you are doing. I appreciate the call, Emily said. Her voice was perfectly level, but I don't think a private meeting serves either of us well at this point. If you'd like to engage, my legal counsel's contact information is on the dispute letter we sent earlier this week. A pause. Have a good morning, Mr. Blackwell. She hung up. The diner was so quiet she could hear Harold Simmons at his usual stool set his coffee cup down very deliberately. Then Harold said to no one in particular, Good girl. And Donna behind the counter let out a breath she had clearly been holding. And Linda at the hostess stand pressed both hands flat against the counter and looked at Emily with an expression that was equal parts admiration and terror. And Emily Carter stood behind the diner counter, 32 weeks pregnant, Ryan's dog tag against her sternum, and she thought, he knows. He knows we're coming. And now everything that happened next depended on whether the thing they'd built in the last 4 days was strong enough to hold against the full weight of Richard Blackwell deciding to push back. She picked up her order pad and went back to work. Because the lunch rush was coming and the tables wouldn't clear themselves, and she had learned over 11 months of survival that you did not let the weight of what was coming stop you from handling what was in front of you. You kept working. You kept moving. You kept your hands busy and your mind sharp and your back straight, and you trusted that the people standing beside you were going to hold their positions, because that was what Ryan had taught her in his way by the life he'd lived, not in words. In example, you ran toward the hard thing. You did not stop to ask whether the odds were in your favor. You ran because someone needed you to, and you trusted that the running was enough. The article went live at 11:17 Thursday night. Emily knew the exact minute because she was sitting at her kitchen table, phone in hand, refreshing the Knoxville Sentinel's website with the focused intensity of someone waiting for a verdict. Marcus was across the table from her. Dex was on the couch. Bishop stood near the window with his arms folded and his coffee going cold in his hand, which was something Emily had noticed he did when he was thinking hard about something, forgot the coffee entirely, just held it like ballast. The headline loaded first. Cedar Ridge developer linked to federal benefits. Manipulation displaced families. Decades of documented retaliation exclusive. Claire Weston's byline underneath it. And below the byline, a subheading that made the kitchen go absolutely silent. 43 cases. One man. How Richard Blackwell turned a small Tennessee county into a private leverage machine. Marcus read it first because he was the fastest reader at the table, and Emily's hands had gone slightly unsteady in a way she did not want to acknowledge. He read it with the same stillness he brought to everything moving through the paragraphs without expression, and then he set her phone down on the table and pushed it toward her. "Read it," he said quietly. She read it. It was 4,000 words. Claire Weston had taken everything Emily's case. Ellen's spreadsheet, Harold's zoning records, Daniel Holt's OIG filing the benefit hold trace to Blackwell's sister-in-law, the 2021 displaced families, the bank loan retaliation against Harold's son, and she had woven it into something that was not just a story about Emily Carter. It was a story about a system, a small, deliberate, years-long system that had operated in the open in plain sight, protected by the assumption that no single piece of it was significant enough to pursue. Until the pieces were put together, Emily Carter's name appeared in the third paragraph. Her rank as a military widow. Ryan's name, his unit, his deployment, his death, the benefit case timeline, the fake invoice, the housing pressure, all of its source documented on the record. And in the final 4 paragraphs, something Emily had not known was coming. Claire had talked to 3 of the other 43 people on Ellen's spreadsheet. All 3 had agreed to speak on record. A retired teacher named Dorothy Sims, who had been forced out of a property she'd owned for 30 years through a manufactured code violation that had been quietly dropped after she vacated. A young family named the Garcias who had lost a lease under circumstances nearly identical to Emily's. A man named Robert Purcell who had fought Blackwell's company in small claims court and won, and whose landlord had subsequently raised his rate to an amount he couldn't sustain, and who had left Cedar Ridge entirely. 3 people who had been alone, who were now in the Sentinel's digital pages part of the same sentence. Emily read to the end of the article and set her phone down. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Bishop from near the window said, "That's the whole picture." "Yeah," Marcus said, "that's the whole picture." Emily pressed her hand to her stomach. The baby was quiet tonight, settled in a way that felt almost deliberate, like he understood something about the stillness of the moment. "It's going to be a different morning tomorrow," she said. "Yes, it is," Marcus said. She looked at him. How different. He thought about it honestly, the way he did everything without performance, without reassurance that wasn't earned. "I don't know exactly," he said, "but Blackwell has been operating in the dark for 20 years. Articles like this function like lights. When the lights come on, what happens depends on what's in the room." "What do you think is in the room?" Emily asked. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "there are a lot of people in Cedar Ridge who have been waiting for someone else to go first." He looked at her directly. "You went first. Now we see who follows." They found out at 6:15 Friday morning. Emily's phone started ringing before her alarm went off. The first call was from a number she didn't recognize. A woman who identified herself as Janet Cole, who had lived in Cedar Ridge for 30 years, and whose husband had worked for one of Blackwell's construction subcontractors and had been let go the week after he'd complained about safety violations, and who had read the Sentinel article at 5 in the morning and had been sitting by her phone since then working up the courage to call. "I don't know if this helps," Janet said, "but I have documents from when my husband was let go. We kept everything. We were afraid to use them, but we kept everything." "It helps," Emily said, sitting up in bed, reaching for the notepad she'd started keeping on the nightstand. "Tell me who to connect you with." She took 4 more calls before she got out of bed. A former member of the town council who had served 1 term in 2008 and had been the subject of what he now understood to be a targeted smear campaign when he'd opposed one of Blackwell's rezoning proposals. A woman who ran a small bakery on Main Street and who had been offered a lease buyout at dramatically below market rate under pressure 3 years ago and had taken it because she felt she had no choice. A retired deputy sheriff who had received what he described as informal discouragement from pursuing a noise complaint against one of Blackwell's construction sites delivered by Commissioner Reeves in a parking lot at 7 in the morning. By the time Emily reached the diner at 8:45, her notepad had 9 names on it. By noon, it had 17. Marcus was at the counter when the diner door opened at 9:30 and Tom Garrity walked in. Not Richard Blackwell. Tom Garrity, the Courier's managing editor, who had run the piece 3 days ago that had framed Emily as a difficult tenant who had golfed with Blackwell on Sundays, who had been doing exactly what he'd been doing for 30 years without anyone making it cost him anything. He looked different this morning. The comfortable authority that men like Tom Garrity carried in their bodies, the assumption that their version of events was the operating version, was not entirely there. It was present, but it was provisional, like a jacket that no longer quite fit. He saw Emily immediately. He came to the counter. "Emily," he said. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I'd like to talk to you." Emily looked at him steadily. "You ran a story about me without calling me for comment," she said. Not heated, just stated. "I know," Tom said. "That was—" He stopped. "That was a mistake. I want to say that clearly." "Was it a mistake or was it a favor?" Emily asked. The directness of it landed on him visibly. "It was both," Tom said after a moment. "Which is worse? I know it's worse." He glanced briefly at Marcus, who was watching him with the particular attentiveness of a man cataloging information. "I'd like to run a correction and a follow-up piece. I'd like to give you the front page Sunday edition." Emily kept her eyes on him. "Why?" she asked. "Because the Sentinel story is going to be picked up by the AP by this afternoon," Tom said quietly. "It's already moving, and when it moves, Cedar Ridge is going to be in a national conversation, and I have a choice about which side of that conversation the Courier is on." He paused, "But that's not the only reason." He reached into his jacket and put a folded piece of paper on the counter. "That's the other reason," he said. Emily unfolded it. It was a printed email chain between Tom Garrity and Richard Blackwell, 6 months of correspondence about coverage framing, specific story decisions, which pieces to run, which to hold, how to characterize certain public figures, which of Blackwell's developments to cover positively. Not instructions technically. Suggestions always. Friendly suggestions between the old friends. But the pattern was unmistakable. "Why are you showing me this?" Emily said. "Because I kept records too," Tom said. "And because I read that Sentinel article this morning and I realized that I have been doing exactly what Claire Weston just spent 4,000 words describing. I just told myself I was doing it for different reasons." He looked at his hands on the counter, then back up at Emily. "I don't want to be in that article when the second one runs." "That's still a self-interested reason," Marcus said from his stool 2 feet away. He said it without hostility, just precision. "Yes," Tom said. He looked at Marcus directly, which took something from him. Emily could see it. "Yes, it is. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But the action it produces is the same regardless of the motive." Marcus considered that. "True," he said. Emily looked at the email chain again. Then she folded it and set it on the counter and looked at Tom Garrity. "Sunday edition front page," she said. "Full story, Ryan's name in the headline, the benefit case, the housing situation, the OIG filing, all of it. You don't soften it and you don't balance it with a quote from Blackwell's PR team." She paused. "And you publish a correction on the original piece, above the fold." Tom Garrity nodded. "Done." "And Tom?" She waited until he met her eyes. "Next time someone asks you to write something about someone who can't defend themselves, you call them first. That's basic. That's what your father did. That's what the paper used to be." Something moved across Tom Garrity's face. Not quite shame and not quite relief. Something in between the particular expression of a person being seen clearly and finding it painful and necessary in equal measure. "Yes," he said simply. "You're right." He left. Harold Simmons at his counter stool watched him go. "First time I've seen Tom Garrity walk out of a room looking small," Harold said. "People can surprise you," Emily said. "Sometimes," Harold said. "Not always." "No," Emily agreed. "Not always." The call from Commissioner Dan Reeves came at 1:47. Not through Patricia Avery this time, directly on Emily's cell phone in a voice that had completely shed the distant political warmth it had carried in every previous interaction and replaced it with something considerably more stripped down. "Mrs. Carter," Reeves said, "I want to discuss your benefit case." "My benefit case is being handled through the VA's Office of Inspector General," Emily said. "You can reach Daniel Holt for any questions." "I understand that," Reeves said. "I want to talk about the county liaison's processing access. Specifically, I want to talk about what I knew and what I didn't know." Emily's hand tightened on the phone. "What are you telling me?" she said. "I'm telling you," Reeves said slowly and carefully, "that I was aware Richard Blackwell had a relationship with the county liaison's office. I was not aware specifically that the processing access had been used to interfere with a federal benefit case. A pause. I want to make that distinction clear. Commissioner, Emily said, are you calling me to establish your legal position? Silence. I'm calling you, Reeves said, to tell you that I have already contacted the OIG directly this morning to provide documentation of the county liaison relationship and my understanding of its scope. Another pause. I am cooperating with the federal inquiry. Emily stood in the diner break room where she'd taken the call, her free hand pressed flat against the wall. Richard Blackwell's closest political ally in Cedar Ridge had just told a federal investigation that he was cooperating. I appreciate the call, Commissioner, Emily said in a voice so even it surprised even her. I'll inform my counsel. She hung up and stood there for a moment. Then she opened the break room door and walked out to the counter where Marcus was sitting. Reeves is cooperating with the OIG, she said. Marcus put his coffee cup down. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said very quietly, it's moving. It's moving fast, Emily said. He's going to know that by now, Marcus said. Blackwell, he's going to know that his political cover just called the federal investigation to position himself. He was already thinking ahead, she could see it. That means Blackwell is isolated. His lawyer is going to tell him to stop communicating, which means his next move is either a public statement or a legal filing. Or both, Emily said. Or both, Marcus agreed. But here's what it also means. He looked at her. Both of those moves confirm that something real is happening. You don't lawyer up and issue statements over a tenant dispute. Emily understood. He's going to make it look bigger than it already looks. Every move he makes from here is confirmation, Marcus said. He's out of quiet options. The public statement came at 4 o'clock. Richard Blackwell's attorney issued it through a Knoxville PR firm, which was itself informative. Cedar Ridge didn't have PR firms, so importing one from Knoxville was a signal about the size of the problem Blackwell was now managing. The statement was 4 paragraphs. It described the Sentinel article as a collection of misleading allegations and selectively curated documentation. It characterized Emily as someone who had been assisted by outside parties with their own agendas. It made a specific reference to the Hells Angels not by name, but by description. Motorcycle organizations with documented histories of criminal activity, and implied that Emily was being manipulated by people whose motives were not what they appeared. Marcus read it on his phone at the diner counter. He was quiet for a moment. Then he set the phone down. He went after you, Emily said. She had read it over his shoulder, and the line about outside parties had landed in her chest in a specific way. He's trying to discredit your involvement. I know, Marcus said. Does that bother you? Emily asked. He thought about it honestly. It bothers me that he's trying to use us to take the focus off himself, Marcus said. It doesn't bother me what he says about the angels. We've been called worse by people with better evidence. He paused. What bothers me is the implication that you're being manipulated, that you don't know your own mind. I know my own mind, Emily said. I know you do, Marcus said. But he's betting that some people in this town will hear Hell's Angels and stop reading. He looked at her. What do you want to do about it? Emily looked at the printed statement on the counter. I want to make a statement of my own, she said. What kind? She thought about it. The kind where people can see my face, she said. It took 2 hours to arrange. Claire Weston, when Emily called her, said yes before the question was fully out of her mouth. A Sentinel photographer who was already in Cedar Ridge working on the follow-up piece. The diner because Emily refused to make a statement anywhere that wasn't on her own ground. Harold Simmons, who insisted on being present and whom nobody argued with. Marcus and his brothers, who positioned themselves at the back of the room and stayed there visible, but not centered, present but not in front. Emily stood behind the counter she'd worked for 4 months and looked at the photographer and at Claire Weston's recorder and at the dozen people who had gathered because word had spread the way it spreads in small towns, fast and sideways, and through every informal channel that formal channels don't know about. She did not have prepared remarks. She had what she knew. My husband's name was Ryan Carter, she said. He was a Marine sergeant. He died overseas 18 months ago. He was brave in ways I can barely describe, and he was kind in ways that mattered more than bravery. She paused. He saved lives, not metaphorically, literally. He ran into situations nobody was asking him to run into because someone needed help, and he was there, and he couldn't make himself not go. The diner was absolutely quiet. I have spent the last 11 months trying to access the benefits my husband died to earn for his family, she said. I have been told to wait. I have been given forms that disappeared. I have had my housing threatened. I have had a fake debt attached to my name, and I have had a newspaper in this town in my community, the community where I work every day, and where my child is going to grow up, run a story that described me as a problem tenant without calling me to ask my side. She looked directly at the camera. The people who helped me are sitting in the back of this room, she said. They ride motorcycles. They wear leather vests with patches. Some of them have histories and records that people like Richard Blackwell's attorney would like you to focus on, so you don't focus on what they actually did. She paused. What they actually did was walk into my diner, recognize my husband's dog tag, and decide that a debt they owed a man who couldn't get collected anymore could be paid to the family he left behind. They made phone calls. They connected me with people who knew how to fight. They sat at my counter and drank bad coffee and did not leave. She pressed her hand briefly to her stomach. A man who manipulates federal benefit systems to keep a pregnant widow from accessing money. Her dead husband earned that man issued a statement today calling my protectors dangerous. She said, I want Cedar Ridge to understand who the dangerous people in this situation actually are. She stopped. The photographer's shutter clicked in the silence. Then Harold Simmons at his counter stool began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, the way old men clap when they mean it. And then Donna was clapping. And then Linda. And then the people who had come in because word had spread, a dozen strangers and neighbors, and people who had their own stones in their chests from their own years of watching Richard Blackwell operate. And the applause in the Morning Glory Diner was not loud enough to reach outside, but it was real and it filled the room completely. Marcus at the back did not clap. He stood with his arms at his sides and watched Emily Carter at her counter, and his jaw was set in the way it set when he was managing something he didn't want on his face. Dex, standing beside him, said quietly, You okay? Yeah, Marcus said. You sure? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Ryan would have... He stopped, started again. He would have been proud of her. He would have been terrified of her, Dex said. Marcus almost smiled. Both, he said. Definitely both. Yeah, and what happened next happened faster than any of them anticipated. The AP picked up the Sentinel story at 4:45. By 6, it had been republished by 9 outlets, 3 of them national. By 7, Emily's phone had stopped being manageable, and Marcus had quietly taken it from her and begun triaging the calls. Media requests to Claire Weston, legal inquiries to Daniel Holt, everything else to a voicemail that Bishop set up for her in under 4 minutes, with the efficiency of someone who had dealt with logistics under pressure before. At 7:22, Daniel Holt called Marcus directly. The OIG has issued a preservation order, Daniel said, on all records related to the county liaison's processing access. That's a formal step. That means the investigation is treating this as a serious federal matter. Timeline? Marcus asked. Unknown. Could be weeks, could be months. Federal investigations move at their own speed. A pause. But the preservation order is significant. It means they found enough in the preliminary material to justify formal preservation, which means they found something. Emily's benefits, Marcus asked. The hold will be lifted while the investigation is active, Daniel said. That's standard procedure. You can't investigate benefit manipulation while the manipulation is still active. I expect the processing to resume within the next 5 business days. Marcus stood in the corner of the diner where he'd taken the call and looked across the room at Emily, who was sitting in the corner booth with Harold and talking in the low, careful way of people working through something important. Daniel, Marcus said, tell me honestly, is she going to be okay? Daniel Holt was quiet for a moment. The benefit case is going to resolve, Daniel said. The housing situation, Sandra Pruitt is already working on emergency stabilization. The legal filing we made on the fake invoice will hold up, and now that there's a federal investigation context, Blackwell's attorney is going to pull back from any collection action because it would look like obstruction. He paused. She's going to be okay. It's going to take time, and it's going to be messy, and she's going to need consistent support through the next few months. But yes, she's going to be okay. Marcus breathed out slowly. Good, he said. Thank you. He went back across the diner and sat down across from Emily in the corner booth, and Harold, who looked between them, and then said with the instinctive social awareness of a man who had been married for 40 years before his wife passed, "I'm going to get more coffee," and left them alone. Emily looked at Marcus. "How bad is the national coverage going to get?" she asked, because she'd seen the AP notification on her phone before Marcus had taken it, and she understood what that meant. "It's not going to be bad," Marcus said. "It's going to be large. There's a difference." "I don't love large," Emily said. "I know." He paused. "But here's what large means in your specific situation. Large means that the OIG investigation has public visibility. Large means that anyone who tries to interfere with it has to do so in public. Large means that Richard Blackwell cannot quietly make this go away because there is no quiet anymore." He looked at her steadily. "Large is the thing that keeps you safe right now." Emily sat with that. "I keep thinking about what happens after," she said. "After what?" "After the investigation. After the news cycle moves on. After your chapter has to go back to wherever you go back to." She was looking at the table as she said it, which was how he knew she'd been sitting with it for a while. Cedar Ridge is going to be the same town it was. The same people, the same dynamics. Richard Blackwell might be prosecuted, or he might not. Either way, I'm still here. The baby is still coming, and I'm still the widow who made trouble. "You're not the widow who made trouble," Marcus said. "That's how some people are going to see it." "Some people," he said. "Not most. Not anymore." He paused. "And you're not going to be alone in this town the same way you were a week ago. You know that." She looked at him. "Do you know what I've been doing every morning for 11 months?" she said. "Tell me." "I sit at the edge of my bed and I hold Ryan's dog tag and I breathe," she said. "I don't pray exactly. I don't talk to him exactly. I just breathe and try to feel like the day is possible." She paused. "This morning I woke up and I didn't need to do that. The day already felt possible before I was fully awake." She looked at him. "That's because of you. Not just you, all of you, but you specifically. Because you knew him. Because you saw something in me that was connected to him. And it made me feel like he was still—" She stopped, found the words again. "Like he was still doing something in the world. Still mattering somewhere." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "He is," Marcus said. His voice was completely steady and completely certain. "Emily, I promise you, he is." The diner was winding down around them, the last table settling their check, Donna wiping the counter and Harold making his way back with his coffee and his careful not noticing of their conversation. The evening light was doing what evening light does in September, going gold and then going fast. Emily nodded slowly. "Tell me something about him," she said. "Something I don't know. Something from over there." Marcus thought about it. "There was a night," he said, "about 3 weeks before the rescue, cold night. We were in the same operating vicinity by accident, one of those overlap situations that weren't supposed to happen but did. My guy Rodriguez, he was having a rough time. Wasn't talking about it, but you can tell. You can always tell." He paused. Ryan noticed. He didn't know Rodriguez. He had no reason to care, but he came over and he just sat with him. Didn't say much, sat with him for about an hour, and the next morning Rodriguez told me he felt better than he had in weeks. He looked at her. When I asked Rodriguez later what Ryan had said to him, Rodriguez told me nothing much. Mostly they just sat there. But Ryan had said one thing. He said, "Whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it like it is yours alone. That's not how it works. We carry things together or we don't get them carried." The kitchen had gone quiet. Even Donna had stopped moving. Emily's hand went to the dog tag. She pressed it hard. She did not cry, but it was the closest she had come in a long time. "That was him," she said softly. "That was exactly him." "I know," Marcus said. "I know it was." They sat in the quiet together for a moment, the kind of quiet that has earned its place. Then Emily straightened, breathed, pressed her hands flat on the table. "Okay," she said. "What do we do tomorrow?" Marcus recognized the shift had seen it now enough times to know what it looked like when Emily Carter put something back where it belonged inside herself and turned toward what was next. "Tomorrow," he said, "we let it run." "That's not nothing," Emily said. "No," Marcus said. "Letting the truth run once it's moving is the hardest thing, because you can't control where it goes." Do you trust it? She asked. He thought about it seriously the way he thought about everything. I trust what we built, he said. The documentation, the sources, the legal filing, the people who came forward. We built it right. The truth running on a good foundation. Yes, I trust that. He paused. I also trust that Blackwell is going to do something in the next 24 hours that we haven't anticipated. He always has a next step, Emily said, quoting Ellen Marsh without meaning to. Everybody does, Marcus said. The question is whether his next step is moving towards something or away from something. He paused. A man moving away from something makes mistakes. He's running the wrong direction now. He's been running the wrong direction since that phone call to your diner. Since before that, Emily said, he started running the wrong direction the day he decided I was manageable. Marcus looked at her. Yes, he said simply. He did. Harold came back to the booth, settled himself with the deliberate care of old knees, and wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. He looked between them with eyes that had seen enough of the world to know when something significant had just finished being said. So, Harold said, what are we doing tomorrow? Emily looked at him, then at Marcus, then at the diner around her, the counter she'd worked, the booth she'd cleaned, the windows she'd watched the parking lot through for 4 months, waiting for whatever was coming. Tomorrow, she said, we show up. Harold nodded, satisfied. Same as always, he said. Same as always, Emily agreed. And it was. And it wasn't, because the person sitting in that booth saying those words was the same Emily Carter who had unlocked the back door of the Morning Glory at 5 a.m. for 4 months, who had carried Ryan's tag against her chest, through every shift, who had breathed through every morning and managed through every impossible administrative wall, and said, I'm fine, until fine became something she was building instead of something she was pretending. But she was also someone who had documents in federal hands, and a journalist with a national platform, and 17 names on a notepad, and a former zoning board member with 20 years of records, and an ex-employee who had sent a spreadsheet at 11:15 at night because she had finally decided it was worth it. She was someone who had people. That was different. That changed the weight of everything. She pressed her palm to her belly one more time, feeling the baby shift and settle, and she thought about James Ryan Carter, who would arrive in 8 weeks into a world that was already different because of the people who had decided to stand, because of a man who had run toward trouble once and saved a life, because of the ripple of that single moment, still moving outward, still reaching things, still mattering. She thought about what Marcus had told her Ryan said to Rodriguez on that cold night, sitting with a man he didn't know because he could see the weight of it. We carry things together or we don't get them carried. She looked at Marcus and at Harold and at Donna behind the counter, who had worked beside her for 4 months and never once looked away. And she understood completely and finally what Ryan had always known and had tried to live, that the point was never to carry it alone. The point was to find the people worth carrying it with, and then to carry it together all the way to the end. Richard Blackwell made his next move at 7:14 Friday morning. Not a statement this time, not a phone call. He filed an emergency injunction in Knox County Circuit Court seeking to halt publication of any further reporting by the Knoxville Sentinel on the grounds that the reporting contained defamatory material that constituted irreparable harm to his business reputation. Sandra Pruitt called Emily before she'd finished her first cup of coffee. He filed an injunction, Sandra said, and her voice carried the particular quality of a lawyer who has seen this exact move before and has been waiting for it. It won't hold. I want you to know that right now, before you panic. Emergency injunctions against press publication are extraordinarily difficult to sustain under the First Amendment. His attorney knows that. This isn't about winning the injunction. Then what's it about? Emily asked. It's about the next 48 hours, Sandra said. He files this, it generates news coverage of its own. That coverage focuses on the legal fight rather than the substance of what the Sentinel reported. It muddies the water. It makes the story about a legal dispute between a developer and a newspaper rather than about a man who manipulated federal benefit systems and displaced 43 families. She paused. It's a delay tactic and a distraction tactic simultaneously. He's trying to reset the narrative. Can he? Emily asked. Not if we move faster than he does, Sandra said, which means I need you to do something today that you're not going to like. Emily put her coffee down. Tell me. I need you to give a full statement to the OIG investigator today, Sandra said. In person. They've requested it, and I've been holding them off to give you time, but today is the day. If you give that statement while the injunction is in the news cycle, it makes it clear to every reporter covering the injunction story that the federal investigation is active and real and moving forward. It takes the injunction from being a story about Blackwell versus the Sentinel and makes it a story about a federal investigation that a powerful man is trying to suppress. That's using the injunction against him, Emily said. That's exactly what it is, Sandra said. Emily was already reaching for her notepad. What time? She said. Tell. Marcus drove her. She hadn't asked him to. She'd mentioned the OIG meeting while she was getting her jacket, and he'd stood up from the kitchen table and picked up his keys, and that had been the entire conversation. She didn't argue. She'd gotten past arguing about the help somewhere around day 3 of this, when she'd realized that accepting it wasn't weakness and offering it wasn't pity. And the sooner she stopped spending energy on that particular internal debate, the better she could use that energy for everything else. They drove mostly in silence. The good kind, the kind that doesn't need filling. Halfway to Knoxville, Marcus said, "How are you feeling? Physically or emotionally?" Emily asked. "Both." She thought about it honestly. "Physically, my back has been hurting since Wednesday, and the baby has been sitting low for 2 days, which my doctor says is normal, but is also profoundly uncomfortable." She paused. "Emotionally, I feel like I'm walking into a federal building to give a statement against a man who has the resources to make my life very difficult for a very long time. And the only thing keeping me from being terrified is that I know what happens if I don't." "What happens if you don't?" Marcus asked. "He wins," Emily said, "and someone on that spreadsheet after me goes through the same thing alone. Without a Daniel Holt, without a Sandra Pruitt, without..." She paused. "Without any of this." Marcus nodded. "Then we go give the statement," he said. "We," Emily said. She looked at him. "You keep saying that." "It keeps being true," he said. She looked back at the road ahead. "Marcus," she said after a moment, "after this is over, after everything settles, what happens to you and the others?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. "We go back," he said finally. "That's how it works. We have lives. Chapters, responsibilities. Dex has his shop in Chattanooga. Bishop has his sister in Memphis he looks in on every month. Cole has a daughter in her first year of college." He paused. "We go back." "And you?" Emily asked. "I go back to what I do," he said. "What do you do?" Another pause. "I run a program out of our chapter for veterans coming home who are having trouble landing. Housing support, employment connections, mental health navigation. Mostly He seemed to search for the right description. "I just make sure they know there are people, that they're not landing alone." Emily turned to look at him. "You do this," she said. "This thing you've been doing for me, you do it professionally." "Not professionally," Marcus said. "We don't get paid, but yes, regularly." "Why didn't you tell me that?" she asked. He seemed genuinely surprised by the question. "It didn't come up." "Marcus." She said his name the way she'd started saying it in the past few days, with the ease of someone who has decided a person belongs in the regular vocabulary of their life. "You have been operating like a professional crisis response team for a week. You have legal contacts, housing advocates, federal investigators, a network that spans at least 3 states. You came into my diner by accident, and you stood up my entire situation in 4 days. That is not nothing." "Ryan saved my man's life," Marcus said. "Simple, immovable." "That's not a complete answer anymore," Emily said. He drove for a moment. "No," he said quietly. "It's not." He glanced at her sideways. "When I walked into your diner and I saw that tag and I understood who you were, I understood something I hadn't fully worked out before, about what we owe each other. Not just veterans. People." He paused. "Ryan ran toward a situation because someone needed him, and he was there. He didn't calculate it. He didn't weigh the risk and determine it was worth it. He just went, because that was who he was." Another pause. "I've been trying to be that kind of person ever since I watched him do it. I'm not always, but I'm trying." Emily pressed her hand to her stomach. "He would tell you," she said, "that you already are." Marcus didn't respond, but something in his face settled quietly into a place it hadn't been before. The OIG investigator's name was Karen Shields, and she was 53 years old and had spent 21 years investigating fraud in federal benefit systems, which meant she had seen every version of what Richard Blackwell had done and several versions worse. She shook Emily's hand with the directness of someone who respected people's time and assumed they respected hers. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "thank you for coming in. I want to start by telling you that what you're going to tell me today is going to matter. Not as a courtesy, as a fact." "I know," Emily said. "Good." Karen Shields opened a folder. "Let's start at the beginning." They were in the room for 2 hours and 17 minutes. Emily told the complete story. From the initial benefit application to the first delay letter to the county liaison to the lease notice to the fake invoice to Richard Blackwell in her diner to Marcus Reed and his brothers to Ellen Marsh and her spreadsheet to Harold Simmons and his 20 years of records to Commissioner Reeves and his Friday morning phone call. She told it sequentially and precisely, and she answered every question Karen Shields asked with the same economy she developed over months of managing this alone. No excess, no embellishment, just the facts and the documentation to support them. Karen Shields took notes throughout in a handwriting so small and precise, it was like watching someone carve. At the end, Karen Shields closed her folder and looked at Emily directly. "I need to tell you something," Karen said. "Off the official record, just person to person." Emily waited. "In 21 years, I have worked cases involving benefit fraud affecting hundreds of people," Karen said. "The thing that allows these situations to persist is not the cleverness of the person perpetrating them. It's the isolation of the people being affected." She paused. "You were isolated, completely, for 11 months, and you kept meticulous records, pursued every channel, and held your position without anyone telling you whether what you were doing was making a difference." She paused again. "That is Mrs. Carter, that is extraordinary. I want you to know that." Emily's throat tightened. She pressed it down. "I had to," she said. "James needed me to." Karen Shields looked at her. "James. That's his name," Emily said. "The baby. James Ryan Carter." Karen Shields looked at the folder in front of her, then back up. "We're going to get James Ryan Carter's father's benefits to his mother," she said. "I can't give you a specific timeline, but I can tell you it is now a priority case under active federal investigation, and the processing hold has already been lifted as of this morning." She paused. "That part is over. The part is over." 4 words. 11 months. $342 in a checking account. Double shifts. A car with bad tires. 500 forms and 500 walls and 500 mornings of sitting at the edge of a bed breathing through it. Over. Emily sat in the chair across from Karen Shields and kept her face steady by an act of will that cost her more than anything she'd done in 2 hours of federal testimony. "Thank you," she said. It came out slightly rougher than she intended. Karen Shields pretended not to notice, which was its own kind of grace. Marcus was waiting in the hallway. He stood up when she came through the door, and he looked at her face and he read it the way he read everything accurately and immediately. "The hold is lifted," he said. "Not a question." "The hold is lifted," Emily confirmed. He breathed out. And then he did something Emily did not expect. He put both arms around her and held on so the way people hold on when the thing they have been braced for the impact of has finally landed and the landing was survivable. She held on back for about 4 seconds, maybe 5. Then they both let go at the same time, the way people do when they've allowed themselves exactly as much as the moment required, and both know it. "Okay," Emily said. She straightened her jacket. "Okay," Marcus said. They walked back to the car in the clean October air, and Emily Carter felt something she hadn't felt in so long. She'd forgotten what it was called. Light, not happy, not yet happy, would take time, and time was something she now believed she had. But light, unburdened by one specific thing she had been carrying for so long, it had started to feel like part of her body. She pressed her hand to her stomach. "You hear that, James?" she said quietly. "We're okay. We're going to be okay." The baby turned under her hands, slow and certain. She took that as a yes. The injunction was denied at 3:40 Friday afternoon. Sandra Pruitt texted Emily, 4 words denied. As expected. Good. Claire Weston called at 3:52 to tell her that the Sentinel was running a follow-up piece Saturday morning that included the injunction denial, the confirmation that the OIG investigation was active, and the statement Emily had given outside the Morning Glory the previous day. It also included a response from Commissioner Reeves's office, which had issued a full cooperative statement through their own PR person, the speed of which told Emily everything she needed to know about where Dan Reeves had decided his interest lay now that the ground had shifted. And it included something Claire told her with the particular satisfaction of a journalist who has spent a week building a story and watched it become what she knew it could be. The AP Wire had now carried the story to over 200 outlets nationally. 3 veterans advocacy organizations had issued statements of support for Emily. A congresswoman from Tennessee had posted on social media asking for an expedited federal review of the case. "You're national," Claire said. "I want you to be prepared for what that means." "What does it mean?" Emily asked. "It means the next week is going to be loud," Claire said. "Interview requests, advocacy groups reaching out, possibly lawyers who want to discuss civil action against Blackwell." She paused. "It also means that Richard Blackwell is currently the subject of more scrutiny than his organization has faced in 20 years of operating, and that scrutiny is now coming from directions he cannot manage locally." "Good," Emily said. "Yes," Claire said. "Good." A pause. "Emily, for what it's worth, this story is going to matter beyond Cedar Ridge. The pattern documented here exists in other communities, other developers, other county officials, other benefit cases being quietly strangled. What you did, the documentation, the persistence, the willingness to go on record, it's going to make it easier for the next person to come forward." Emily thought about the 43 rows on Ellen's spreadsheet, about the other 32 names she'd never know, about the people who had come before her and hit the same walls alone without a Marcus Reed walking through the door. "That's the part that matters most," Emily said. "The next person." "I know," Claire said. "That's why I wanted you to know it." That evening, all 6 of them were at the diner. Marcus, Dex, Bishop, Jerry Cole, and a man named Rafe, who hadn't been there from the start but who had driven up from Chattanooga that afternoon because Dex had called him and said something was happening worth being part of. Emily didn't ask how Dex had described it. Whatever he'd said, Rafe had driven 4 hours without hesitation, which was its own complete answer. Emily had closed early, Linda and Donna had stayed, and Harold had appeared at his usual stool at 7 with a bottle of good Tennessee bourbon that he set on the counter and said was for the occasion, without specifying which occasion because he seemed to feel it was self-evident. They sat around the push-it-together corner booths and they ate. Donna had actually cooked not the standard diner menu, but her grandmother's pot roast recipe that she claimed she never made for anyone, and which turned out to be the best thing Emily had eaten in as long as she could remember. They talked, not about Blackwell, not about the investigation, not about the national coverage that was still moving across the AP Wire. They talked the way people talk when something difficult has passed its peak, and they are on the other side of it, and the other side turns out to have good food and decent bourbon and people worth sitting with. Dex told a story about a road trip that had gone wrong in ways that kept getting more elaborate with each detail, and by the end of it, Donna was laughing so hard she had to put her dish towel over her face. Bishop, who Emily had thought was a quiet man, turned out to have opinions about college football that were strongly held and eloquently expressed, in which Harold disagreed with entirely and not quietly. Jerry and Cole, who she'd barely spoken to individually, turned out to be from a small town in Arkansas and a suburb of Atlanta respectively, and to have come to the same chapter by completely different routes that somehow ended at the same place, which seemed to be the way most things worth having happened. Emily sat in the middle of it and felt the warmth of it move through her. At one point, Marcus caught her eye from across the table. She lifted her chin, slightly a question. He shook his head slightly in answer. "Nothing. Just checking." She nodded. "I know. I'm good." That entire conversation happened in about 3 seconds, and nobody else noticed it, and Emily filed it away in the part of herself that was taking careful note of what it felt like to have someone check on you without making it a production. Around 9, when the bourbon was lower and the conversation had gone quieter, in the way of people who are full and tired and comfortable, Harold set his glass down and said with the deliberateness of someone who has been holding something until the right moment, "I want to say something." Everyone looked at him. Harold was not a man who commanded rooms by habit. He was a man who sat at a counter stool and ordered the same turkey club and occupied his space with the quiet dignity of someone who had lived long enough not to need to announce himself. But when he spoke this way deliberately with the weight of something prepared, the room listened. I have lived in Cedar Ridge my entire life, Harold said. 74 years. I watched this town be built, and I watched some of it get taken apart, and I watched people try and fail to make it what it should be. He paused. I watched a man run this county like his personal property for 20 years, and I said nothing. I told myself I was protecting my family, protecting my own situation. I told myself it wasn't my fight. He looked at Emily. But it was. It was always my fight. Because what happens to the people in this town is my fight, same as it's everyone's fight, same as it was the fight of the young man whose tag you're wearing. Emily's hand went to the tag as it always did involuntarily. Ryan Carter didn't know those men he saved, Harold said. He didn't owe them anything. But he went anyway because that's what you do when you have the chance to do something and you're standing right there. He looked around the table at Marcus, at Dex, at Bishop, at Jerry and Cole, and Rafe, at Donna, and Linda, at Emily. I'm grateful to every person at this table for being the people who went anyway, and I'm sorry it took me 74 years to figure out how to be one of them. The table was quiet. Then Dex said, "You're here now, Harold." Harold nodded. "I'm here now," he agreed. Marcus raised his glass. Everyone raised theirs. They drank to Harold. They drank to Ryan. They drank to Emily and to James Ryan Carter, who would arrive in 7 weeks, and to the 43 people on Ellen's spreadsheet, and to everyone who had held their documentation and waited and stayed. Emily held her water glass because bourbon was not on the table for another 2 months, and she raised it with everyone else, and she thought that a water glass raised in this company was worth more than any champagne she'd ever drunk. The next twist came from the last direction anyone expected. 3 days after the diner dinner on a Monday morning, Emily's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, a 571 area code, which she looked up while it rang and identified as Northern Virginia. She answered it. "Mrs. Carter," a man's voice, older with the particular controlled authority of someone in a position of institutional power. "My name is General Thomas Ware, retired. I was Ryan Carter's commanding officer for 18 months. Emily sat down. "I've been following the reporting," General Ware said. "I want you to know that I should have reached out sooner. I knew about your benefit case. I was told—" He stopped, started again with the precision of a man choosing his words around something that clearly cost him to say. "I was told the case was processing normally. I accepted that. I should have checked independently, and I did not." A pause. "That was a failure on my part, and I am telling you directly." "General Ware," Emily said carefully, "why are you calling now?" "Because Ryan Carter saved 3 lives under my command," General Ware said. "Not 1, 3. The record you know about is the most documented, but there were 2 other situations in the 18 months I knew him where he acted with the same disregard for personal safety on behalf of others." Another pause. "I have been in contact with a Senate Veterans Affairs subcommittee that is looking at the systemic issues your case has exposed. They would like to speak with you." The Senate. Emily pressed her hand flat on the kitchen table. "They want me to testify," she said. "They want to hear from you," General Ware said. "Testimony or a formal statement, that's their decision. But your case has become a reference point in a conversation that is now happening at a federal level about the vulnerability of survivor benefit cases to local administrative interference." He paused. "Mrs. Carter, what happened to you was not unique. Your willingness to document it and fight it and ultimately make it public has created a moment where something systemic could actually change." He paused again. "Ryan would want that." Emily was quiet for a long moment. She was thinking about what Sandra Pruitt had said about the pattern, about other communities, other developers, other benefit cases quietly strangled. About Claire Weston saying the story would matter beyond Cedar Ridge. About Karen Shields saying that isolation was what allowed these situations to persist. She was thinking about 32 other names on a spreadsheet whose stories she didn't know. "Tell them yes," Emily said. "I'll speak." She called Marcus before General Ware had been off the phone for 90 seconds. He answered on the first ring. "Then it's subcommittee," she said. "Veterans Affairs. They want me to speak about systemic survivor benefit vulnerability." A pause. Not long. Marcus didn't need long. "When," he said. "Ware is going to get back to me with a date," she said. "It's going to be after James arrives, maybe 6-8 weeks after." "I'll be there," Marcus said. "Marcus, you don't have to." "Emily," his voice was quiet and absolute. "I will be there." She stopped arguing because she'd learned in the past week that some offers weren't made to be declined. Some offers were made because the person making them understood something about the weight of what you were carrying and had decided fully finally without reservation to help carry it. You didn't decline those. You accepted them the same way Ryan had accepted the brotherhood of men beside him in the field. Not as weakness, as the thing that made the mission possible. Okay, she said, you'll be there. Then, James Ryan Carter arrived on a Thursday, 5:47 in the morning, which Emily would later say was completely appropriate for the son of a Marine and the son of a woman who had been waking up at 4 for the past year. He arrived early like someone who had places to be and didn't see the point in waiting. He was 7 pounds, 4 ounces. He had Ryan's dark hair, or at least that was what Emily told herself immediately, and what she would continue telling herself, and what as the weeks went on turned out to be true. He had Ryan's mouth, the particular set of it, the slight pull at the left corner. He arrived healthy and loud and absolutely certain of his presence in the world. Emily held him and said nothing for a long time. There were no words adequate to what she was feeling, and she knew that, and she didn't try to find them. She just held him, her hand behind his head, his warm weight against her chest, and she breathed. The same breathing she had done every morning for 13 months at the edge of her bed. The same deliberate, earned breathing that had gotten her through the shifts and the forms and the walls and the nights. But different now, because the breathing had somewhere to go. She pressed her lips to the top of his head, and she said very quietly 2 words, "Hi, James." He turned his head toward her voice the way newborns do, the instinctive orientation toward the familiar, toward the thing they already knew before they knew anything else. She was the thing he already knew. She was his. He was hers. And Ryan was in this room, she was certain of it, not as grief, not as absence, but as presence, as the specific quality of light in the moment when something promised becomes real, as the dog tag warm against her collarbone, as the name she had already chosen, already given, already spoken into the world before this boy arrived in it. James Ryan Carter. Alive. So, they came 2 days later, all 6 of them. They came with flowers that Dex had clearly selected himself because they were wildflowers from a roadside stand and not the kind of formal arrangement someone buys from a florist. And with food that Bishop had made, actually made a container of soup and a covered dish of something that smelled extraordinary, and which Bishop refused to describe as anything other than food. Jerry had a small stuffed bear that he handed over with the self-consciousness of a large man giving a stuffed animal to a baby, which made Emily love him immediately in a way she hadn't previously had time to properly register. Marcus came last through the hospital room door. He stood at the threshold for a moment, looking at Emily in the bed and James in her arms, and his face did something Emily had not seen it do in the 9 days she had known him. It opened, completely. Without the managed steadiness, without the controlled assessment. Just a man standing in a doorway looking at something that mattered. He crossed the room and stood beside the bed. Emily tilted James toward him slightly. "Marcus," she said, "meet James Ryan Carter." Marcus Reed looked at the baby. He looked at him for a long moment, the way you look at something you have been given that you didn't know you needed. Then he reached out very carefully and put one finger against James's hand. The baby's fingers curled around it immediately, the instinctive grip of a newborn, tiny and absolute and strong. Marcus exhaled. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "Your dad was the best man I ever knew." The room was quiet. Dex turned toward the window. Bishop looked at the ceiling. Jerry found something extremely interesting to examine on his left shoe. Emily watched Marcus hold her son's hand, and she understood with a clarity that felt like the conclusion of something very long, that Ryan's legacy was not a thing that could be contained in a document or a benefit check or a headline. It was not even contained in the dog tags she wore or the name she had given her son. It was this, exactly this, a room full of people who would not have been in the same place at the same time for any reason other than who Ryan Carter had been. People connected by a single act of courage that had rippled outward through time until it reached this hospital room on a Thursday morning and gathered here warm and real and irreducible. The legacy was the people. It had always been the people. 6 weeks later, Emily Carter sat in a Senate subcommittee hearing room in Washington, D.C. She wore a dark blue dress and Ryan's dog tag. She had James at home with Ryan's mother, who had driven up from Murfreesboro 3 days ago and who had held her grandson for 36 hours straight and had not stopped crying for the first 4 of them, which was the most genuine and complete grief and joy Emily had witnessed in a single human being. Marcus was in the gallery. So was Sandra Pruitt. So was Daniel Holt. So unexpectedly was Harold Simmons, who had taken the first airplane flight of his life at 74 years old, because he said if Emily was going to Washington, he wasn't going to hear about it secondhand. Emily sat at the table in front of the subcommittee, and she looked at the senators, and she did not feel small. She had felt small so many times in the past 14 months, at the benefit office windows, at the bottom of the email chains, in the apartment at 4 in the morning when the weight was heaviest and the future was most obscure. She had felt small, and she had gotten up anyway every single time because James was coming and Ryan was gone and there was no one else. She did not feel small now. She felt the specific size of a person who knows exactly what they are there to say. She said it. She told them Ryan's name first. She said it clearly without preamble because she had decided that every conversation about what happened to her would begin with him. Sergeant Ryan Carter, United States Marine Corps. Not a case number, not a statistic, not a benefit claim. A man, her husband, the father of her son. She told him what happened to his family after he died. She told them about the walls and the delays and the administrative manipulation and the isolation and the fear and the 12-hour shifts and the $342 and the dog tag pressed against her sternum in the dark because it was the only solid thing she could reach. She told them about Ellen's spreadsheet, 43 families, not isolated incidents, a system. She told them about Marcus Reed and his brothers who had walked into her diner and recognized a debt they had decided to pay. She told them about Harold Simmons and his 20 years of records, about Daniel Holt and Karen Shields and Sandra Pruitt and Claire Weston and everyone who had stood up because she had stood up first. And then she said the thing she had come to say. The system that failed me, she said, is the same system that is failing families across this country right now, today. While we are sitting in this room, military survivors who are isolated, overwhelmed, and unaware that what they're experiencing is not bureaucratic accident, but exploitable vulnerability. She looked directly at the subcommittee chair. My husband gave his life for this country. What this country gave his family in return was a manipulation target and a 60-day eviction notice. She paused. That is the current answer. We are here to make a different one. The room was quiet for a moment. Then the subcommittee chair, a senator from Georgia who had served 2 terms on the Armed Services Committee, and who had the look of a man who had heard many testimonies and processed this one differently, leaned forward and said, Mrs. Carter, I want to assure you that this committee is committed to. Senator, Emily said not unkindly, I've heard a lot of assurances. What I'd like to hear is a mechanism, specifically what changes to the federal benefit processing system will prevent administrative holds from being placed by county-level liaisons without federal oversight. And what is the timeline? A brief silence. And then from the gallery, Harold Simmons, who was 74 years old and had never been to Washington and had no idea that applause in a Senate hearing room was not generally appropriate, began to clap. A marshal moved toward him. The senator held up his hand, stopping the marshal. And then in the gallery, Marcus Reed began to clap as well, and Daniel Holt, and Sandra Pruitt, and 4 other people in the gallery who had no connection to Emily Carter, but who had been listening. The senator looked at Emily Carter. Mrs. Carter, he said, let's talk about mechanisms. The legislation that emerged from that subcommittee over the following months was called in its official Senate designation the Survivor Benefit Protection and Accountability Act. In the press, the advocates, and the veteran community, it was called something else. They called it the Carter Act. Emily found out about the name from Daniel Holt, who called her on a Tuesday afternoon when James was 3 months old and had just that morning produced his first genuine smile. Not the reflex smile of a newborn, but a real one directed at the mobile above his crib, full-faced and unguarded and devastating in its completeness. She was still thinking about that smile when Daniel called. They're naming it after Ryan, Daniel said. Informally, it's going to stick. Emily sat down on the couch with James against her shoulder. Ryan would have argued about that, she said. He would have said it was everyone's work. It was, Daniel said. His name makes it easier to remember why. She thought about that. Okay, she said. Okay, tell him thank you. Tell who? She pressed her hand to the top of James's head. Ryan, she said simply, whenever you get the chance. Daniel was quiet for a moment. I'll do that, he said. I'll pass. Marcus called that evening. He called every week, had been calling every week since he'd gone back to Chattanooga, which he'd done the week after Emily came home from the hospital. True to what he'd said, he had gone back to his life, his chapter, his program, the veterans he was helping land. He'd gone back and he'd kept calling. How's James, he said, which was always the first thing he said. He smiled today, Emily said. A real smile. I may have cried. You don't cry, Marcus said. I cried, Emily said him. Apparently there are exceptions. Good, Marcus said, and she could hear that he meant it completely. Marcus, she said. Yeah. I've been thinking about something, she said. Your program, the one you run for returning veterans. What about it? I want to help with it, Emily said. Not financially, though, eventually maybe that too. I mean, I've been navigating the benefit system for 14 months. I know every wall. I know how to document, how to dispute, how to find the people who actually have the access to move things. She paused. I could be useful. Silence on the other end. Not hesitation. She'd learned to read his silences. This one was the silence of a man who had been hoping for something and was adjusting to having gotten it. You have a 3-month-old, he said. James is very portable, Emily said. And motivated. Motivated, Marcus repeated. He's a Carter, Emily said. He comes by it naturally. A pause. And then Marcus Reed, who in the 9 weeks she had known him, had produced the shadow of a smile twice and a half, laughed. A real laugh, unguarded and sudden, the kind that happens when something catches you before you can manage it. It was the best sound Emily had heard in a long time. Yeah, Marcus said when he'd recovered. You can help. Good, Emily said. I'll need a specific role. I don't do vague. I noticed, Marcus said, and I'll need to be able to bring James to meetings. Fine. And I want to start with benefit documentation because that's where the gaps are worst. Emily, his voice was warm in a way it had been becoming gradually over 9 weeks of weekly calls. You're already in. You don't have to negotiate. She smiled. I know, she said. I just like knowing what I'm agreeing to. I know you do, he said. That's why I said yes. She sat on her couch with her son asleep against her shoulder and Ryan's dog tag warm against her skin, in the Tennessee mountains dark outside her window, and she thought about all of it. The whole enormous weight and length and complexity of the past 14 months, the forms and the walls and the 4 a.m. mornings and the double shifts and the $342. Blackwell and the injunction and the spreadsheet in the Senate hearing room and Harold's airplane and the mobile. James had smiled at that morning like it was the most wonderful thing he'd ever seen. She thought about a Marine who had run toward trouble because someone needed him. She thought about the people that single act had called into being. The network of grace it had built without design across years and miles in a country that could sometimes feel like it was made entirely of walls. She thought about what it meant that she was sitting here, that James was here, that the Carter Act existed, that Marcus Reed called every Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock regular as the mountain weather. She thought about Ryan. She always thought about Ryan, but the shape of thinking about him had changed. It wasn't the raw, airless grief of the first months, the kind that sat on your chest like a stone. It was something she could hold now, something with edges and weight and warmth, a thing she could carry and still move. She pressed her lips to the top of her son's head. Your dad changed things, she said very quietly. He was one person and he made one choice, and it changed things. That's what's possible. She felt James breathe against her chest, slow and even and certain. That's what you come from. She looked out the window at the ridgeline going dark against the evening sky. Ryan Carter had given his life for something he believed in. And everything that had grown from that, the people, the legislation, the son in her arms, the network of veterans who would navigate the system better because Emily Carter had learned to navigate it the hard way and had decided to share what she knew. All of it was still him, still moving, still mattering, still reaching forward into a world he had left but had not in any way that counted abandoned. The legacy of a fallen soldier is not only what he died for, it is what he made possible in the people who loved him and the people who knew him and the strangers he touched by being simply and completely the person he was. Ryan Carter did not stop changing the world when he died. He had only just begun.